Her mother called her Samantha, her subordinates called her Miss Stinson, and her friends called her Sam. She had recently turned 30, and everything in life seemed to be going according to plan, except for her childhood. Sam's mother, Daphne, raised her daughter alone. There was no help from grandparents. They disowned their daughter when she ran away from home at 15, and they wanted nothing to do with their granddaughter, whom they considered a disgrace. Sam never knew her father. Her mother had promised that she would reveal everything when Sam turned 18. But on her 18th birthday, Sam only heard, "I don't know who he is. We met once, spent the night together, and then you were born. He doesn't know about you because I couldn't contact him. I don't even know his name, nothing. But what about his address?" Sam asked. "Do you remember where he lived? We could go there and—" "We camped in a tent," her mother replied with a sad smile. "We were on a hiking trip in the mountains. Remember, I told you about it?" Sam became determined to find her father, gathering what little information she could, the time they met, his approximate appearance, and the name of the town near their campsite. But it was all in vain. By the time she turned 20, Sam had resigned herself to never finding him and stopped searching. Her mother worked as an accountant all her life. She earned just enough to pay the bills and buy groceries. If she received a bonus, she would always buy tickets for herself and Sam, and they would go on vacation, traveling across the country and discovering new hiking trails. Sam didn't like hiking, but she knew how to set up a tent and build a fire from a young age. When she was 15, she told her mother that she wasn't going on another trip. Her mother wasn't offended and went alone, leaving Sam at home for the first time. They lived in a modest little apartment that they would fix up every year, sometimes new wallpaper, sometimes a fresh coat of paint on the windows. It was a pleasant place to be. Left alone, Sam decided to invite her friends over. When they walked into the apartment, they wrinkled their noses in disgust. "Do you live here, Sam? How awful. Are there any cockroaches?" She didn't listen to them and showed both of them the door. After that, she was disliked by her classmates. Sam was a beautiful girl with thick chestnut hair, long eyelashes, and big eyes. Her mother, despite not having much money, always tried to dress fashionably and instilled in her daughter a good sense of style. They often went to flea markets together, digging up real treasures, designer jeans, suits, dresses, and jackets. Sometimes they even found shoes and stylish bags. Her classmates mistakenly thought Sam was the child of wealthy parents. That's why they tolerated her beauty and straightforwardness. But when they learned the truth, they began to humiliate her. They doused her with dirty water, threw rags at her, and ambushed her in the stairwell to beat her. Sam bravely fought back, often ending up in the principal's office with her tormentors. The boys always respected Sam because, unlike the other girls, she didn't engage in scheming or gossip, and they started defending her. Soon, Sam had a new group of friends, 5 boys. That's how she finished school. When it was time to choose a university, her mother suggested Sam study accounting. After all, she had come to the city once without money, without connections or support, studied while working as a sales clerk during, and now she had a stable job and wasn't struggling. Sam, who had never really thought about what she wanted to become, listened to her mother. And in her first year of studies, she realized she had made a mistake. But she didn't show it and got her diploma. Then one evening, "Mom, I want to start my own business," she said over tea. "What do you think?" Sam's mother, Daphne, slowly set her cup down on the table. "What kind of business?" "My own clothing boutique." Daphne silently looked at her daughter, trying to understand if she was joking. Sam awkwardly smiled at her mother. "I'm not asking for your money, don't worry. I just want to know what you think." "Go ahead, of course," Daphne muttered in confusion. "But where are you going to get the money for all this?" "I'll try to borrow some," Sam replied. "I'll take out a loan, earn it, figure something out." They didn't discuss the topic again. Sam got a job at a large firm as an assistant accountant. She earned a good salary. Her mother thought Sam had changed her mind. But she hadn't. Sam saved her money diligently and kept careful track of it. At night, she would imagine her future boutique in vivid detail and fall asleep with a blissful smile on her lips. She turned 25. Daphne began pressuring her daughter to focus on her personal life. "Sam, why don't you go out? A good guy won't find himself." Sam couldn't admit that she preferred spending her evenings with her mother so as not to spend extra money. So she just shrugged. "I don't want to. I'm fine as it is." "You're so beautiful," Daphne would say, shaking her head. "You're smart. But your beauty will fade, and then you'll regret it." Sam didn't react to her mother's words, understanding that she was worried about her future. They made peace and continued living in harmony until that long-awaited day arrived, the day Sam had been dreaming of. She rented a space, bought a sign, and placed a large order for clothes. She took her first 3-week vacation and worked in her boutique in every possible role. She painted the walls, steamed and hung the clothes, cleaned the floors, interacted with customers, and made sales. 2 weeks later, Sam returned home one evening with her earnings and proudly announced to her mother, "I'm quitting my job." Daphne looked at her daughter and the stack of money on the table with confusion. "What's this? I've been wanting to tell you for a while, but I was afraid it wouldn't work out. I opened a boutique. I rented a space downtown. Sales have been going strong for a week now. Look," she picked up the bills, "this is the revenue for the week. Can you imagine what it will be like in a month, Mom?" Daphne clutched her chest. "I thought you'd met someone, that you were going on dates, but you've been spending all your time at your boutique. Aren't you happy?" Sam asked. "It's such a huge responsibility, Sam, such a risk. What if your competitors decide to set your boutique on fire tomorrow? They won't. And what if the owner of the space changes their mind and sells it? They won't," Sam smiled. "Everything will be fine, Mom, I promise." The next morning, she quit her job and fully immersed herself in her business. At first, Daphne viewed her daughter's success with skepticism. But eventually, Sam's optimism and steady income won her over. Daphne softened and started bragging to her coworkers that Sam now owned a real business. 6 months later, they went on their first overseas vacation and gradually became wealthier. Sam took out a mortgage on a small apartment. 3 years later, she paid it off, and a year after that, she sold it and took out another mortgage on a larger place in the city center. She got her driver's license and bought a car. She convinced her mother to quit her job and help her in the boutique. Daphne agreed quickly, especially since she soon had surgery to remove a blood clot. The doctors advised her to walk more, which she did by working as a sales consultant. By then, Sam had 2 sales associates, Tina and Katie, working in the boutique, along with Irene, a cleaner. Both Tina and Katie were model-like in appearance and very pleasant to interact with. Irene made sure the floors and displays sparkled every morning. Sam started by selling clothing from unknown brands but gradually began collaborating with well-known ones. In addition to clothing, she added shoes, perfumes, and accessories to the inventory. Eventually, she registered her own brand. She personally selected fabrics and designed styles late into the night. She even traveled to the manufacturing sites with her mother to oversee production. Sam also managed the boutique's social media accounts. Her brand quickly became popular among those who appreciated classic styles, soon dominating the entire inventory. Loyal customers, most of whom were wealthy women, praised Sam. "You're amazing. It's a pleasure to look at clothes from your brand. Where do you find these fabrics? Is this silk? How much does it cost to make a silk dress? At this price, it's a steal." Soon, Sam hired a manager, a 40-year-old colleague from her previous job named Melanie. Sam began dedicating more time to negotiating business expansions and opening new sales points. She noticeably blossomed. She went to a salon once a week, visited the pool twice a week, and went to the gym just as often, where she worked with a personal trainer. She took her mother with her everywhere, except when Daphne was away on her next health retreat. One day at the pool, Daphne felt unwell. Sam immediately called an ambulance, but they couldn't help. Daphne died in her daughter's arms. It was later revealed that the cause was a recurring blood clot. Sam was devastated by her mother's death. She blamed herself for a long time. She stopped leaving the house and fell into a deep depression. Melanie, visiting her boss and friend, saw how much Sam was suffering. She tried to comfort her as best she could and once, almost casually, mentioned a new regular customer. "Robert came by today," she said. "He bought up all the skirts again." "Strange, isn't it?" "Strange," Sam replied. "Is he reselling them?" "Most likely," Melanie agreed. "Oh, I don't like him. He's too charming. And we can't refuse him." "Why not?" Sam asked, surprised. "Just tell the girls not to sell to him." The next day, an elated Melanie informed Sam that Robert wasn't a reseller but just a loving older brother. He had come by with his sister, bought her several dresses from the new collection, and expressed his condolences regarding the untimely death of Sam's beloved mother. Sam was taken aback. "How does he know?" "I didn't say anything," Melanie assured her, "and neither did the girls," I asked. Sam tossed her phone aside, settled comfortably on the couch, and suddenly recalled how, during the funeral, a man had approached her and offered her an umbrella. "Take it," he had said. "What about you?" Sam had asked absent-mindedly, staring at her mother's grave. Rain droplets trickled down the man's face. He smiled. "You need it more," he had replied before heading toward the cemetery gates. Sam had thought at the time that he must have buried someone that day too. Daphne's funeral had been quiet and simple. The priest had read a prayer over the coffin, which was then lowered into the ground. Sam had been the only one present. Melanie had wanted to come, but Sam insisted she stay at the boutique. That man had been the only other person at the cemetery besides Sam. She found her phone and asked Melanie to get her Robert's number. When she called, after a few short rings, she heard a familiar voice. Yes. So Robert was that man. "Thank you for the umbrella," Sam said instead of a greeting. Robert laughed. "Sam, is that you? Are you following me?" Sam asked. "What makes you think that? How did you know about the funeral?" "I didn't know. I buried my father that day. I saw you standing in the rain, so I lent you the umbrella." Sam pressed her lips together. "And rest assured, I'm not buying your clothes for resale. My sister was deeply depressed after our father's death. I wanted to cheer her up. I'm not at fault that she's a fan of your work, right? And honestly, your sales could use the boost right now." Sam smiled. "You're quite the gentleman, Robert. Thank you for everything." He began calling her in the evenings whenever he had a free moment. They talked about their childhoods, school years, reminisced about places they'd visited, discussed encounters with competitors, and planned new trips and ventures. Robert was now running his father's business, overseeing several major retail spaces. After a month of mourning, Sam returned to business negotiations. She met with Robert in person, and he soon became not just her business partner but also her lover. Melanie, who had brought them together, couldn't shake a strange feeling of unease as she watched their relationship progress so quickly. She often expressed her concerns to Sam, but Sam only waved them off. "Melanie, I'm not a child. Robert can be trusted." "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. He loves me, and I love him. Sometimes it only takes a few interactions in person to realize someone is your destiny. It happens." Besides, Sam would wink at her friend, "He's wealthier than me. If anything, I look like the one trying to snag a desirable catch." Melanie, who had 2 failed marriages behind her, decided Sam was right. Sam met Robert's sister, Audrey. They spent Christmas together, the 3 of them, at Robert's house. The girl didn't leave the best impression on Sam, too spoiled and capricious for her taste. She had just turned 25. Sam couldn't help but compare herself to Audrey, realizing how different they were. At 25, Sam had started her business from scratch, learning how to negotiate with suppliers. Audrey, on the other hand, lived a life of luxury, which led her to be frivolous with her spending and often criticized the expensive gifts from her brother. "Robert, what is this?" Audrey would say disdainfully, holding the Christmas present her brother had given her, a handbag. "Last year's collection." "Audrey, I don't know these things," Robert replied dismissively. "Don't like it?" "I showed you the photo," Audrey pouted. "Sam, see how inattentive he is. He just pretends to be nice." However, neither Audrey's character nor Melanie's warnings had any effect on Sam. And when, during the holiday dinner, Robert pulled a ring from his pocket, got down on one knee, and asked if she would marry him, Sam agreed amidst Audrey's joyful shout of "Hooray!" The wedding was modest. Robert wasn't ready for a grand celebration as he was still mourning his father, and Sam was still grieving her mother. So they decided to have a small ceremony followed by dinner at a restaurant. Melanie, one of the invited guests, hugged Sam as she congratulated her and whispered, "I hope everything goes well for you." Life returned to its normal routine. Sam opened a few more boutiques and began working on a new collection with her designers. She lived with Robert, who often brought up the topic of children, which made his wife quite uncomfortable. "Robert, what children?" Sam would smile, embracing him in the evening in their bedroom. "We need to be more secure first." "I'm already secure," he replied seriously. "But I'm not." He sighed sadly. "Don't you trust me, Sam? Don't you believe I can provide for you and a child? Isn't that insulting?" Sam remained silent. She had nothing to say. Perhaps her hesitance was linked to her mother's advice, which had always been to prioritize financial security. Or maybe growing up without a father had instilled in Sam a fear of having her own children. Or perhaps Melanie's words had imprinted on her mind. Robert's behavior is suspicious, and he can't be trusted. Visiting her mother's grave, Sam placed flowers on the granite and asked, "Mom, what should I do? He's asking for children, but I don't want them. What's wrong with me?" Her mother smiled silently from the photograph. On Sundays, Sam always met Melanie for coffee to discuss business and life. One time, after listening to Sam, Melanie just shrugged. "You said you trust Robert, that he's not a gold digger." "I did. But I can't look into the future to know if we'll be happy." "That's life," Melanie laughed. "Get used to living with some uncertainty. You can't control everything. It's not like business." After this conversation, Sam decided to compromise with Robert and try her hand at motherhood. After all, starting her business had been scary too. She had managed that, and she could handle motherhood. Sam became softer and more affectionate with her husband. She let down her guard. Robert appreciated the changes. They were often late for work, and the doors to their bedroom were locked earlier and earlier each night. Audrey would smile mysteriously at breakfast, glancing at her happy brother and his wife. Sam's business was thriving. Profits were growing. New partners appeared daily. One day, Robert suggested increasing her supplies to his shopping centers. Sam hesitated. "I'm not sure we can handle it. You know, we've had a waiting list for dresses since February. Everyone's waiting for more. Then don't collaborate with others. Sell everything with us." Robert raised an eyebrow. "Or don't you trust me?" Sam thought about her husband's suggestion for a week. She decided to follow his advice. She terminated contracts with other distributors and companies and signed new ones with Robert's company. The workload for her and her assistants decreased. There was less paperwork. And by summer, Sam found out she was pregnant. To her surprise, Robert didn't seem overly excited about the news. He gave her an awkward hug and forced a smile. "Is it true? You're pregnant?" Sam pulled out the test results from her bag. "See? You're going to be a dad, Robert, just like you wanted." He muttered something incoherent and left the bedroom, claiming he needed a drink of water. Sam called Melanie, who reacted to the news of her boss and friend's pregnancy with much more enthusiasm. "Wow, Sam, congratulations. What wonderful news. You're going to be a mom, that's incredible." "But Robert doesn't seem too happy," Sam replied, feeling down. Melanie reassured her. "Men hide their emotions. He's happy, probably just overwhelmed with joy. They only pretend to be strong. Deep down, they're like children." Sam felt reassured, thanked her friend, and went to take a shower. When she returned to the bedroom, Robert was already there. He apologized for his reaction, hugged her tightly, lifted her in his arms, and spun her around. The pregnancy went smoothly. In the second month, Robert started talking about Sam finding a deputy and gradually stepping back from work. The pregnancy should go without unnecessary stress. And once the baby was born, there would be even less time for the brand. Sam agreed. The first candidate for the deputy role was Melanie. They met at a cafe. After hearing Sam out, Melanie cautiously asked, "Did you make this decision yourself, or did Robert pressure you?" "No," Sam frowned. "Good grief, Melanie, we're about to have a child, and you still suspect Robert of all sorts of things." Melanie shrugged and agreed to take on the temporary leadership role. Sam returned home from her meeting, feeling pleased with herself. Robert wasn't home yet, so she asked Audrey where he was. Audrey smiled and replied, "I don't know, you're his wife, after all." Robert came back early in the morning, disheveled and clearly intoxicated. Sam, who had been up all night, watched as he clumsily tried to remove his shoes. She asked, "Where were you?" "Oh, we were just celebrating the deal," he waved his hand dismissively. "I forgot to let you know." "Sorry." Sam left for the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. They didn't speak all day. At breakfast, they sat in silence, staring at each other. But by evening, they had made up, and the incident was forgotten amidst the usual daily routines. Robert was spending more time at the office, while Sam busied herself with buying baby clothes. She was also struggling with constant nausea, spending hours in the bathroom and unable to eat much, as even the smell of food made her sick. Because of this, Robert started having meals outside the house, as did Audrey. Sam spent her days alone. One day, she woke up feeling much better. Deciding to surprise Robert, she went to his office, bringing his favorite cheesecake from a cafe. At the office, she was greeted by a pretty secretary. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Stinson." "Good afternoon. Is Robert in?" Sam asked. The secretary gave her an awkward smile. "No. That's all right, I'll wait in his office," Sam said, heading towards the door at the end of the hallway. The secretary blocked her path. "No, Mrs. Stinson, you can't." "And why not?" Sam asked, confused. At that moment, the office door opened, and Robert stepped out, adjusting his tie with an annoyed expression. "What's going on? Why all the noise?" He forced a smile when he saw his wife. "Oh, Sam, it's you." Sam sensed something was wrong. She moved closer to Robert, trying to look over his shoulder. "Who are you hiding in there?" she asked. "No one, don't be ridiculous," Robert laughed awkwardly. Sam stomped on his foot with her heel, making Robert yelp in pain. She easily walked past him and opened the door. Inside, with her back to the entrance, stood Melanie, hastily buttoning up her blouse. When the door opened, she turned around, trying to cover her chest. "Hi, Sam. What are you doing here?" Sam's heart was pounding. She turned and walked away. Robert ran after her. As Sam reached the stairs, he tried to stop her, grabbing her arm roughly. Sam cried out, wincing in pain as she tried to pull away, but she lost her balance and tumbled down the stairs, hitting each step hard before losing consciousness. When she came to, she was in a hospital room. Robert was sitting beside her, holding her hand. Seeing that Sam was awake, he kissed her hand and said, "Hello, darling. How are you?" "Get out," Sam hissed through uncooperative lips before slipping back into darkness. In a half-dream state, she overheard a conversation between the doctor and her husband. "We couldn't save the baby. But in the future, she'll be able to have children if she continues treatment." A tear rolled down Sam's cheek, unnoticed by both the doctor and her husband. She fully regained consciousness 2 days after being hospitalized, and the first thing she did was ask the nurses not to let her husband into her room, explaining that he was responsible for her fall. The nurses understood and blocked all of Robert's attempts to get through the reception desk. They also kept Melanie out, who, having seemingly lost her usual brazenness, repeatedly tried to see Sam while waving a bouquet of flowers. "She's my friend. Why aren't you letting me see her?" Melanie demanded. "She needs rest," the nurses responded curtly. Sam recovered quickly. Even while still in the hospital, she began planning her next steps. She had no desire to live with Robert or even see him again. She decided to file for divorce. She also needed to find a replacement for Melanie, as it was clear they could no longer work together. A police officer visited Sam to find out what had happened, how she had fallen. Sam didn't lie, she honestly told him about her husband's affair and the scuffle on the stairs. To her surprise, the officer just shrugged. "So, you fell by accident, then? It happens. Just be more careful next time." She felt humiliated. It suddenly hit her that she had lost her child. She grieved bitterly and for a long time. 2 weeks later, Sam was discharged. Robert was waiting for her outside the hospital with a bouquet of flowers. He rushed to her, trying to embrace her. Sam coldly pushed him away, announced her decision to file for divorce, got into a taxi, and left for her apartment, which had been empty for a long time. Once inside, Sam took her medication, sat on the dusty floor, and cried. She cried for a long time until it started to get dark outside. When she finally stood up, she dusted herself off, washed her face with cool water, and began cleaning the apartment. Around midnight, she took a hot shower and went to bed on fresh sheets. The next morning, she headed to her boutique. When Melanie saw her, she tried to put on a cheerful face and asked, surprised, why she hadn't been allowed to see Sam in the hospital. "You're fired," Sam interrupted her stream of words, "for sleeping with my husband." The salesgirls, who had inadvertently witnessed the scene, began whispering among themselves, staring at Melanie in astonishment. Her face flushed as she briefly retreated to her office. Moments later, holding her handbag, she left the boutique, slamming the door behind her. Robert kept calling Sam, but she didn't answer. Instead, she contacted her lawyer and asked him to start preparing divorce papers. Unexpectedly, Audrey showed up at the boutique. As always, she was perfumed and dressed to the nines. She embraced a surprised Sam, who was just finishing a conversation with her lawyer in her office. "Sam, hi. How are you?" "Robert's worried, he says you're not picking up his calls. You shouldn't be doing this. You just got out of the hospital, and now you're back at work. You need to rest. Did he send you here to make up with me?" Sam smirked, pulling away from Audrey. "Come on, you've never cared about my health. Why the sudden concern?" "You're right," Audrey smiled, sitting down in a chair. "I'm here for another reason." "And what's that?" "You know that if you go through with the divorce, all your business will come under Robert's control, right?" Sam laughed nervously. "Why would that happen?" "Because otherwise, you'll end up in jail," Audrey continued to smile. "Robert and Melanie pulled off quite the scheme right under your nose. What scheme? Sam asked, confused. Audrey sighed, pulled a folded piece of paper from her handbag, and placed it in front of Sam. Sam unfolded it. It was a copy of a contract with suppliers. The volume was staggering. For a few months now, you've been selling synthetic fabric as silk on an industrial scale, Audrey explained. Didn't Melanie tell you that you changed suppliers and just forgot to inform the clients or update the labels? I don't understand, Sam looked at Audrey, bewildered. What's not to understand? You're a fraud, Sam. And you're also not paying full taxes. Some of the transactions are illegal, with you changing the brand name. Sam felt her legs give way, and she sank into a chair, unbuttoning her blouse. She looked at Audrey, who seemed quite pleased with herself. And what does he want from me? To come back to him? Oh, you're no use to him anymore, Audrey waved her hand dismissively. Hand over the business, and you'll get your divorce. You'll never have to see either of us again. Audrey stood, adjusted her short dress, and walked out of the office. She then returned, saying through the half-open door. You know, I never liked your designs. I only wore them because Robert asked me to. I've been wanting to tell you that for a while. After Audrey left, Sam's hands trembled for a long time. She repeatedly checked the financial reports, and as she stared at the computer screen, she couldn't hold back her tears. How could this happen? She had only entrusted the business to her friend for a few months, and now she found herself embroiled in a fraud scandal. It was terrifying to imagine how much money was involved. If Robert decided to take revenge, she could be drowning in debt for a long time. She didn't want to hand over the brand to Robert and Melanie, so she wiped her tears and decisively dialed her lawyer's number. Hello, I have another matter to discuss with you. I want to pull all the products from sale because the fabric doesn't match the stated composition. Yes, preferably today. Calls started pouring in from sales representatives. Sam patiently explained to each of them what had happened. In the evening, someone knocked on her office door. Hello, Mrs. Stinson, said a man in uniform as he entered the office. Several others were waiting behind him. Yes, Sam replied. You are suspected of fraud. All property, including equipment and documents, will be seized for investigation. Please come with us. Where? Sam exhaled. To the station, for questioning. At first, Sam was confident. She wasn't guilty of anything. Melanie had managed the entire production, and Robert handled the sales. But in the investigator's office, it quickly became clear how wrong she was. Mrs. Stinson, the investigator laughed after listening to her, everyone in this room starts blaming others for their troubles. But I really didn't know, Sam interrupted him. The investigator looked at her sternly and added. You knew everything. She was taken to a holding cell, where she spent the night. The next morning, her lawyer came and informed her that there was nothing he could do to help. Robert and Melanie had also been questioned. Melanie claimed she was only following Sam's orders and was just an executor. Robert was shocked by the discovery of the fraud. Sam ground her teeth in anger as she listened to the lawyer. So, what? Is there nothing that can be done? There is, the lawyer replied. Confess. A full confession will lighten the judge's sentence. The trial took place a week later. Sam was released from custody on her own recognizance. During that time, she desperately tried to find another way to solve her problem. But at the hearing, she ended up giving a full confession. Robert and Melanie stuck to their story during their testimony, placing all the blame squarely on Sam. Melanie even took it a step further, accusing Sam directly. Your Honor, Sam deliberately made me take control to avoid punishment herself, Melanie concluded. The court retired for deliberation and then returned with the verdict. Sam was found guilty. However, instead of the 3 years of probation her lawyer had promised, she was sentenced to 3 years in a general regime colony with all her assets seized by the state for tax evasion. She was taken directly to the colony from the courthouse. The escort, a stern woman, asked Sam if she had any relatives or friends who could bring her personal belongings. Sam shook her head no. She was in shock, still unable to believe that she would spend the next 3 years in prison for the crimes of her husband and his lover. She was fortunate with her first cellmates. Both were young, calm women. One had killed her husband in self-defense. The other had stolen to provide for her child. Sam had no visitors. No one sent her care packages either. Her cellmates shared everything with her. One day, the guard came for Sam. "You have a meeting with your lawyer." A glimmer of hope sparked in Sam's heart. Maybe they had caught Robert and Melanie in a lie. Or perhaps they had confessed, overcome by guilt. Surely, they couldn't just imprison a woman who had recently miscarried because of them and move on with their lives. But it turned out they could. It was even worse. Robert had sent the lawyer with divorce papers. He planned to remarry soon. To Melanie. Sam staggered out of the visiting room and fainted right in the corridor. She had never expected such betrayal, such cruelty, even from Robert. For a while, she couldn't bring herself to get out of bed. She was transferred. Her cellmates changed. The daily routine changed as well. It became impossible to wallow in misery, and the wound of betrayal slowly began to heal. Sam now spent her days working as a seamstress. The other women teased her. "Our businesswoman is sewing her new collection, Miss Prison." Sam didn't react to the provocations, clenching her jaw in silence and continuing her work. She suddenly found herself with a goal: to get out of prison and visit her mother's grave. Her time in prison took its toll on Sam. The first wrinkles appeared on her once smooth forehead, and her once open and warm gaze became cold. She lost her trust in people forever and vowed to rely only on herself from now on. Despite her good behavior, Sam was denied parole. She was released after serving her full sentence. She stepped out into a city blooming with the early summer, and was horrified to realize that, despite trying to freeze her heart for 3 years, she had failed. Her heart rejoiced at every green leaf, every smile from a small child. During the investigation, everything was taken from Sam: her business, her personal car, her savings in the bank. Even the apartment where she had once lived with her mother was auctioned off. She was left with nothing. She walked along the sidewalk, trying to blend in with the crowd in her somewhat shabby pantsuit, wondering what she should do next. Sam first went to the cemetery, spending half of the little money she had on the journey. Her mother's grave was in terrible condition. A janitor noticed Sam, who was in her suit, pulling out weeds with her bare hands, and shook his head. "Why now? You never visited, and now you're cleaning up with your bare hands. What can you do with just your hands? You need a shovel at the very least." Sam shot him an angry glance. She wanted to snap back at him, but suddenly she burst into tears. She sat down right on the ground and began sobbing hysterically. The janitor, alarmed by her reaction, hurried off somewhere. However, he soon returned with a bottle of water and a shovel. While Sam sipped the water, still sobbing, he uprooted all the weeds. Then, sitting down beside her, he wiped the sweat from his forehead. "See? It's done, and you were so upset." Sam sensed the goodness in him and told him what had happened, how she had lost her child first, then her husband and her business. The janitor just shook his head as he listened. My goodness. When Sam fell silent, he stood up, brushed himself off, and helped her to her feet. "Don't worry, I'll take care of everything. I'll mow the grass and clean the monument. You go on." Sam left the cemetery feeling lighter. One happy thought kept circling in her mind: there are still good people in the world. After the cemetery, she decided to visit Irene, who had been working as a cleaner in one of Sam's boutiques for a long time. Irene used to be close to Daphne, Sam's mother. They had bonded over a shared interest in travel. Often, after work, Irene would drop by to visit Sam and Daphne. They would drink tea and look at travel photos for hours. Irene was the only person from Sam's past life whom she still trusted. While Sam was serving her sentence, Irene wrote to her and sent her care packages a few times. Right after Sam's arrest, Irene was fired. Melanie had made sure of that, knowing the cleaner sympathized with her former boss. Irene, who was 65 by then, struggled to find decent work. She survived on a modest pension but eventually found a job teaching at a music school. The pay was meager, but it was enough to live on. Sam felt ashamed to come to Irene, knowing how modestly she lived. But she had nowhere else to go. As she reached the station to catch a train to the city, she suddenly heard groaning. Sam looked around but couldn't find the source of the noise. She turned toward some roadside bushes and hesitantly called out, "Hey!" In response, she heard the groaning again. She didn't dare go down into the bushes, so she shouted from the roadside, "Are you there? Do you need help?" A man emerged from the bushes. He looked emaciated, with a matted beard, sunken eyes with deep bags under them, and sunburnt skin. Sam realized that he was most likely homeless. He confirmed this, saying, "I haven't eaten in 3 days, miss. I've got no money. My stomach hurts from hunger." Sam frowned and felt around in her pocket for the last of her money. The homeless man followed her movements with his eyes. Sam handed him the bills. "Here, take this." The man climbed up to the road, clutching his stomach, and accepted the money from Sam. He nodded. "Thank you, miss. There's a cafe nearby," Sam said, glancing around. "Let me walk you there, so you don't collapse on the way." She took the man's arm, noting the strong smell coming from him. "Great," Sam thought as she discreetly glanced at her dirt-streaked suit and shoes. "Now I look and smell like a homeless person too." They walked in silence for a while. Then the man cautiously looked at Sam and asked, "Why are you walking with me?" "I already told you," Sam replied. "I don't want you to fall and die on the way." The man smiled. "I thought you didn't trust me." Sam glanced at him but said nothing. In a way, the man was right. She wanted to make sure he spent her last bit of money on food, not alcohol. Sam didn't trust him. But on the other hand, her encounter with the kind janitor had restored her faith in the goodness of the world. They approached the cafe. The cashier behind the counter, seeing them, ran outside and waved his hands, trying to close the door and block Sam and her companion from entering. "No, no, you can't come in." "And why not?" Sam asked, surprised. The cashier looked her over carefully. "You can come in, but he can't." Sam was about to argue, but the homeless man stopped her. "Don't bother," he said, handing her back the money. "Please, just buy me some food." Sam went into the cafe. The cashier let her in and slammed the door shut behind her, leaving the homeless man outside. Sam bought some food and water, then handed everything to the man, who thanked her. They walked back to the station, feeling the cashier's disapproving gaze on them. The man sat down on the road, leaning his back against the platform stop, and began to eat greedily, wincing from pain now and then. Sam watched him until her train arrived. Then she hurried onto the train, hoping she wouldn't get caught by a ticket inspector, as she had no money left for a ticket. The ticket inspector entered the nearly empty train car just one stop before Sam's destination. The elderly woman and the mother with her child gave Sam disapproving looks as she walked toward the exit, accompanied by the inspector. Once off the train, Sam continued on foot. She reached Irene's place by evening. At one point, Sam took off her sandals because they were painfully rubbing against her feet. She walked barefoot, occasionally drawing judgmental and disapproving stares. "Day drinking, huh?" muttered a woman standing next to her at a crosswalk. "I'm not drunk," Sam replied. "The sandals are just killing my feet." "Sure, whatever you say," the woman grumbled, stepping away. Sam had been to Irene's place twice before when she had taken her mother to visit. She found the right building and hesitated before pressing the intercom button. Glancing down at her dirty feet, she smirked. Then she pressed the button. Irene didn't answer right away. "Yes. Irene, hi, it's Sam." A loud gasp came through the speaker, followed by the door buzzing open. Sam called the elevator, and as the doors opened on the 5th floor, she saw Irene standing there, hand over her mouth. "Sam!" Irene rushed to hug her. "Oh my God, Sam, you're out." "Yeah, I'm out," Sam returned the hug. "I'm sorry to just show up like this. I've got nowhere else to go." Irene ushered her inside, gently guiding her with a hand on her back. Irene's apartment was small but cozy, just one room and a kitchen. Heavy furniture filled every corner, shelves crammed with music sheets and books. Sam wanted to wash her hands, but Irene sent her straight to the shower. Standing under the hot water, Sam smiled for the first time in a long while. How good it felt to simply wash. There had been no hot water in prison, and even decent soap was a rarity. Plus, showering there meant feeling exposed, with your back to other women who might laugh at you. After the shower, Sam sat in Irene's kitchen, sipping tea while Irene prepared dinner. Sam shared stories of her life in the colony, and Irene listened intently, stirring the food in the pan. Then she sat across from Sam. "Sam, what are you going to do now?" "I don't know," Sam laughed awkwardly. "Maybe I'll go to Robert, get on my knees, and beg for a job." Irene shook her head. "Don't joke like that." "I'm serious, I really don't know," Sam replied more earnestly. "First, I need to find a job, then a place to live, and we'll see what happens after that." "You've got a place to live," Irene said. "Stay here until you're back on your feet. As for a job..." She stood up, left the room, and rummaged through a chest of drawers in the hallway. Finally, she returned to the kitchen with an envelope in her hands. "Here." Sam took the envelope. "What's this?" "From your mother. She told me to give it to you if something bad ever happened to you." With trembling fingers, Sam opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. In it, Daphne explained how worried she had been for her daughter and, just in case, had set up an account in Irene's name so no one could claim the money except Sam. The letter included the account number and the bank's details. Sam couldn't believe her eyes. She looked at Irene, who just smiled and went back to dishing out dinner. Sam asked, "Is this for real? She really set up an account in your name?" "For me?" "That's right. You're not joking. These aren't your own savings." "Irene, if you're giving me your last bit of money just to help me, you really don't have to." Irene laughed. "Where would I get that kind of money? Come on." They spent the evening discussing the latest news. It was true, Robert had married Melanie. They had no children. Only those loyal to Melanie remained working at the boutique, the rest, including Tina, had quit and found other jobs. Nothing was known about Audrey. She hadn't been seen in town and was likely living abroad, just as she had always dreamed. Robert, too, often took his new wife to resorts, where they burned through money. He paid his employees irregularly, and the boutiques faced constant staff turnover. Old customers had stopped coming, unhappy with the quality of the goods and service. Some even boycotted Robert and Melanie after learning about Sam's miscarriage and the subsequent trial. It turned out that many in the town supported Sam, but more people still saw her as a fraud. The next morning, Irene went to work, leaving Sam with a spare set of keys. Sam had a slow breakfast, put on her freshly laundered suit, and headed to the bank. Irene had lent her the money for the trip. As Sam looked at the crumpled bills on the bus, she fought back tears. It was clear that Irene had earned that money with great difficulty, yet she handed it over to Sam without expecting anything in return, even trusting her with the keys to her apartment. At the bank, a polite consultant informed Sam that only the account holder, Irene, could withdraw funds. He also refused to disclose the account balance. So, Sam returned home empty-handed and spent the day cleaning and preparing dinner. That evening, when Irene returned from work, they went to the bank together. The same consultant politely informed Irene, after checking her passport, that the account held about $120,000. Sam and Irene exchanged glances. "Would you like to withdraw the entire amount?" the consultant replied. While Irene was transferring the funds to a new card, Sam found herself pondering how her mother had managed to save such a significant amount of money. Then it dawned on her. She remembered all the holidays and important dates when she would gift Daphne money or simply transfer funds to her account so her mother could treat herself to a salon visit, a nice meal out, or anything else she desired. But Sam never saw her mother with expensive items or bags that she might have bought herself. It became clear that Daphne had been quietly depositing all the money her daughter gave her into the bank over time, and that's how the sum had accumulated. After their trip to the bank, Sam invited Irene to a restaurant to celebrate. Irene hesitated. "Looking like this?" she asked. "You're right," Sam said thoughtfully, and she whisked Irene off to a spa, followed by a visit to a beauty salon. Later, they stopped by a nearby boutique and each bought a dress. Feeling refreshed and revitalized, they enjoyed a dinner at a restaurant. When they returned home, Sam began searching for an apartment on a classifieds website. Meanwhile, Irene, admiring herself in the mirror in her new dress, spoke to Sam sternly. "This is the first and last time I'm accepting such an expensive gift from you, Sam. The first and last. I thought you might quit your job now," Sam replied, glancing up from her phone. "Quit? Why would I? You have money." Irene snorted. "That's your money. I don't need it. Just make sure you spend it wisely. I'm not leaving my job. I like it." Still, before Sam moved out, she convinced Irene to take $2,000 in cash. "Use it to go on a trip, in memory of my mom." "Well, if it's for that," Irene laughed, hugging Sam goodbye. Sam quickly adjusted to her new life. Prison felt like a distant memory. She updated her wardrobe and rented a small apartment in the city center. On her first day there, Sam sat on the windowsill, sipping coffee as she gazed at the city. She liked her new place, though she still missed her old apartment and was determined to get it back. As for Robert's house, she didn't miss it at all. It had always felt uncomfortable, alien. While married to Robert, Sam thought it was just a matter of time before she got used to the house, believing that the sense of hostility she felt from the walls was simply because she hadn't lived there long enough. Now, she realized there had been a good reason for her discomfort. Perhaps during those moments of unease, Robert was talking to Melanie, planning how to get rid of her. Or even entertaining Melanie in his office while his loyal sister Audrey sat across from Sam in the living room, grinning smugly at her growing belly. A shiver ran down Sam's spine as she realized how easily she could have been killed in that house. People like them were capable of anything. She decided to take a walk around her new neighborhood, feeling a strong urge to visit the boutique. She wanted to see if things were as bad as Irene had described. So Sam pulled up her hood and headed toward the boutique. The first thing that caught Sam's eye was the sign. It was different. Melanie had changed the brand name, which was just as well. Sam didn't want her brand associated with what she saw in the shop window. What a nightmare, she thought, looking at a garishly tacky dress. And she expects my clients to wear this? Cars used to pull up outside the boutique, with a constant stream of customers. Now, Sam saw an empty store with bored salesgirls, none of whom she recognized. She decided to go inside. The bored girls perked up at first when they saw Sam, but then they gave her a once-over and drifted back to their corners, resuming their boredom. Sam browsed the clothes on the racks, everything was gaudy and vulgar. When she touched one of the dresses and took it off the hanger, a salesgirl rushed over. "Ma'am, please put that back." "Why?" The dress was snatched from her hands and returned to the hanger. "It's expensive. It's from the new collection," the girl explained. Sam looked at the price tag and couldn't help but laugh. This cheap trash for that much money? The salesgirl grabbed her arm and led her to the exit. "You'd better leave." "Why?" Sam asked again. But she received no answer. Outside, Sam pulled down her hood and realized they must have mistaken her for a thief or a crazy person. She laughed at herself. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed a car pulling up to the boutique. Melanie stepped out. She was unrecognizable, having put on weight. Despite her expensive shoes and dress, she now looked rather disheveled. When she entered the boutique, Melanie began yelling at the salesgirls in an obnoxious voice. Sam, afraid of being recognized, quickly left. As she stood at the bus stop, she noticed it had started to drizzle. Without an umbrella, Sam pulled her hood back up. A man sitting on the bench behind her suddenly grumbled. "Not again." Sam turned instinctively. She saw a stray dog looking pitifully at the man, begging for food. The man snapped. "I don't have anything. Get lost." The dog approached a few more people but, not receiving any food, eventually lay down on the asphalt, resting his head on his paws. Sam hesitated. She wanted to feed the dog but didn't quite understand why. Maybe 3 years in prison had made her kinder. The bus was still nowhere in sight. Sam sighed and ran through the rain to the nearest grocery store, where she bought a pack of sausages. And hurried back to the bus stop, worried that the dog might have left. Fortunately, the dog was still lying under the shelter, trying to stay dry. But all the people were gone. The bus must have come while Sam was in the store. Sam sat on the bench, opened the pack of sausages, and the dog, smelling the food, stood up, shook himself off, and approached her. She fed him one sausage at a time, watching as he ate. Suddenly, she heard barking behind her and turned around. A whole pack of dogs was running toward her, clearly drawn by the smell of food. The dog next to Sam growled as he finished his sausage. Sam sensed trouble. She didn't want to get bitten or caught in the middle of a dogfight. Quickly, she dumped the remaining sausages onto the ground, tossed the empty pack, and moved away from the bus stop, finding shelter under the awning of a nearby building. An old man with a cigarette was also taking refuge there, blowing clouds of tobacco smoke in her direction. Sam coughed pointedly, but the old man didn't take the hint and kept on smoking. The dogs reached the bus stop. To Sam's surprise and relief, they didn't start fighting. They divided up the sausages, growled at each other a bit, and then settled down to finish the scraps. The bus was still delayed. Sam shifted from foot to foot, patiently waiting and turning her back to the smoke blowing her way. The rain had turned into a drizzle and was almost gone. A rainbow shone in the sky. Suddenly, she heard a familiar voice. "Manny, come here." The scruffy dog sprang up, ran toward the man who had called him. He was standing a little way off from the bus stop. Sam squinted at him and gasped when she recognized the homeless man she'd met before. He seemed to recognize her too, waving a hand. "Hi there." The old man beside Sam wrinkled his nose at her. Sam walked over to the homeless man. "Hi. You're living?" she started to ask. "Here," he finished. "I'm not living in a cemetery, after all. It's a bit early for that." Sam chuckled. "I'm living too. Are you feeling better?" "Better, sure. Better than ever. I'm the happiest man in the world because it's such a beautiful place." Sam tried to discreetly sniff the air. The homeless man smiled. "I'm sober." "Sorry," Sam blushed, "but you're saying some weird stuff." "Weird? Like what?" "About the world." "But it's true." "Great, so now he's a druggie," Sam thought. "I'm not on drugs," the man countered, as if reading her mind. "The name's Morris." "And you are?" "Sam." They shook hands. Sam noticed that Morris looked healthier than during their first encounter. He seemed cleaner, and his face no longer had that sickly pallor. "Where are you living?" she asked. "Here." Morris pointed to a building. "Don't get too excited. I'm just living in the entryway. An old lady around here takes pity on me and lets Manny and me stay the night." "And you?" "Me?" Sam was confused. He hesitated, searching for the right word. "What? Homeless?" Sam laughed. "Well, almost. You could say that. I'm renting an apartment downtown." Morris whistled. "Sorry, first impressions can be deceiving." "Can't argue with that," Sam thought, but instead she said aloud, "So, Manny's your dog?" Morris nodded, looking around at the pack. "They're all mine." "What?" "I feed them all. Someone's got to, right? Us homeless folk have to stick together, or we won't survive." He leaned in closer to Sam, sniffed her, and said enviously, "You smell great. Just took a shower, I bet." Sam was taken aback by Morris's sincerity. Instinctively, she pulled her hoodie's zipper up a bit higher. Morris noticed her discomfort and stepped back. "I'm sorry," he said. "Do you want to take a shower?" Sam asked. Morris blushed and let out a nervous chuckle. "You want to invite me over to your place to clean up?" Sam hadn't actually considered inviting a homeless man into her home. What if the apartment owner found out? Sure, she had the money to rent or even buy a new place, but she didn't want to risk such an awkward situation. She liked the apartment and had grown accustomed to it. Who knew what to expect from a stranger, especially a homeless one? What if he wanted to rob her or, worse, kill her? Reality had shown her that men shouldn't be trusted too easily, even if they seemed caring and polite. Sam shrugged. "No, not at all. I'm just trying to understand why you asked." "You wouldn't understand," Morris said with a bitter smile. "Only someone who's lived on the streets would get it. You start to value simple things, like hot water, and you crave them more than anything else. And you envy those who have them." Sam pondered this. She had been in a similar situation when she was in prison. She remembered how much she had savored that first hot shower. Just 3 years ago, she had been relaxing in her own jacuzzi every evening. Over time, she had indeed come to appreciate the simple joys of civilization. She sighed, looked at Morris, who was now petting Manny, and spoke in a slightly gentler tone. "If you'd like, I can pay for you to use a sauna. You can clean up there." Morris's eyes lit up. "Really?" "Yeah. I can't invite you to my place because the apartment isn't mine. I'm not sure how the owner would react to guests, but I understand where you're coming from. I've been in similar circumstances." "I was in prison. For 3 years. Morris stared at Sam in astonishment. Then his expression shifted to one of sympathy and gratitude. He mentioned that there was a sauna nearby. Sam walked him there and paid for a single visit. The receptionist wasn't thrilled about having such a guest but said nothing. She merely cast a contemptuous glance at Sam as she handed them a towel, a robe, and slippers. Sam paid the bill and then stepped outside to the courtyard, where Manny loyally waited for his master. The other dogs were also nearby, their barking audible from where Sam sat on a bench. An elderly woman pushing a cart walked by. Upon hearing the barking, she shook her head, pointed at Manny, and said to Sam, "These dogs need to be caught and taken to the woods. There are too many of them around here." Sam didn't respond. She patted Manny and watched the old woman walk away with a tinge of sadness. So much bitterness. This revelation struck her every day, over and over. There were so many angry and unhappy people around. At night, when Sam recalled her past and was filled with hatred towards her ex-husband and friend, dreaming of revenge, she would remember this revelation and exhale. No, she wouldn't go down that path. She wouldn't resort to deceit, and certainly not to violence. She would seek justice through a fair and honest trial. She hadn't figured out how yet, but she was determined to. She had enough money and time to think it through. Morris, meanwhile, had cleaned up and joined Sam, sitting next to her. He smelled fresh, like soap. Sam smiled. "Shall we go for dinner?" "Oh no," Morris protested. "Where? I'm not even always allowed into stores." Sam took him to her favorite diner in a food truck. She bought them hot dogs and coffee. Morris ate, squinting from the sunlight that peeked through the clouds. "So," he turned to Sam, "you were in prison." "What for?" "For my husband," Sam replied, laughing. "I didn't kill him, don't worry. He set me up." She told Morris about the last 5 years of her life, how she had built up her business, cared for her mother, and then struggled to regain her sense of purpose after her mother's death. How she met Robert, who helped her expand her business, introduced her to his sister, and proposed. He wanted a child, then started cheating, framed her, and had her imprisoned. Now he was living well, married, and, according to Irene's stories, didn't deny himself anything. And Melanie was running the business, or rather, driving it into the ground. Morris listened intently. When Sam finished, he confessed. "I've been through something similar. Prison, a setup, fraud charges, losing everything. My best friend set me up. He's probably very happy now." Sam looked at Morris in surprise. "You were a businessman?" "In the past," he said with a smirk, finishing his hot dog and giving the leftovers to the dog. "Now I can't even get clean or find a meal." Sam thought about how, if it weren't for her mother and Irene, she too might be dirty and hungry now. How important it was to have reliable people in your life, those who wouldn't turn away in tough times. "Have you tried looking for work?" she asked cautiously. "I want to find a job, but I know it'll be tough with a criminal record." "I've tried," Morris replied. "I even worked for a while. But with a record, you're right, no one wants to hire you. I mostly worked as a laborer. Once, I got scammed out of my pay. I went to confront the boss, and he beat me so badly I couldn't walk for a week. That's when you found me," he smiled. "You could say you saved my life. I was preparing to die." Sam was shaken by his confession. She had saved his life. "And now, how do you feel?" "Great," Morris smiled, stroking the dog. "Tomorrow, I'll go look for a new job. Maybe I'll get lucky. And if you get beaten and cheated again?" Morris gave her a sly look. "You care about me like family." Sam smiled. This man had somehow become familiar to her during their time together. Maybe she sensed a kindred spirit in him, someone who had also been wronged by life. Morris thanked Sam for everything and started getting ready to leave, saying he was headed somewhere to spend the night. Sam felt uneasy. She offered Morris a place to stay with her. He frowned. "But you said the apartment owner was against it." Sam hesitated, embarrassed. "I was just scared of you." "I'm sorry. And now? Are you still afraid?" She shook her head. Morris didn't hesitate for long. It had noticeably gotten colder outside, which meant it would be cold in the entryway, too. They, along with Manny, took the bus to Sam's apartment. They went up to the right floor and entered. Morris removed his shoes, apologizing profusely for his tattered socks. Sam smiled and handed him a pair of slippers. The dog obediently lay down on the rug by the door and slept until morning. Morris put his clothes in the wash and hung them on the balcony to dry. He inhaled the scent of the detergent, laughing like a happy child. Sam made up the sofa for him, giving him sheets, a pillow, and a blanket. While Morris made his bed, she took a shower. When she came out, he was already under the blanket, snoring softly. Sam lay in her bedroom, on her bed. She regretted 100 times that night letting a stranger, a homeless man, into her home. She couldn't sleep, clutching a set of keys under her pillow. But Morris didn't come to kill her. In the morning, she got up and found him still asleep. She carefully started making breakfast, trying not to make any noise, an omelette and an Americano. Morris walked into the kitchen as she was eating. He sniffed the air and stretched. "It smells wonderful. Like home. Would you like some omelette? Coffee?" Sam offered. He agreed, sitting across from her and praising her cooking skills as he ate. Then he fed the dog and offered to wash the dishes. Sam, sitting in the living room, anxiously watched the kitchen door, expecting any moment for an aggressive man with a knife to burst out, demanding all the money and valuables in the house. But Morris emerged empty-handed, with the dog at his feet. He said apologetically, "We should probably go." "Thank you." "Wait," Sam said, feigning outrage. "Did you really think I'd let you leave without paying for your stay?" Morris didn't get her joke and tensed up. "I don't have any money." Sam laughed. "I'm kidding. But I would like you to tell me your story first." "I've shared mine with you. What's there to tell?" Morris sat on the carpet, stretching out his legs. Manny settled down beside him. "What do you want to know?" "Everything." He thought for a moment and began with his childhood. He was local, born here to a teacher and a shop assistant. They lived modestly, so he worked odd jobs from a young age, mostly washing cars or delivering newspapers. With the money he earned, he bought gifts for his parents and sneakers for himself to fit in with the other kids in his group. From the first grade, he became friends with a boy named Tony. Tony was shorter, frail, and wore glasses. Older kids often bullied him, and Morris stood up for Tony. They started walking home together and later signed up for karate. They did homework together and skipped tests to ride the carousel. Morris's father was a geography teacher, and from a young age, Morris loved studying countries, continents, and the names of seas. After meeting Tony, he began showing him his encyclopedias and a map on his bedroom wall, where he had marked with flags the places he wanted to visit when he grew up. Tony liked the idea. They started dreaming of adventures together, even trying to build their treehouse out of construction scraps. It didn't work out. When Tony found out that Morris was working after school, he asked to join him. They washed cars together for a while, splitting the earnings equally. But one day, while they were resting in the yard with buckets full of soapy water, a fancy car pulled up. A man in a suit got out and barked. "Tony, get over here." Tony flinched, grabbed his briefcase, and ran to the car. He got in, and the man quickly followed, closing the door behind him. They drove off. This was how Morris learned that his friend was from a wealthy family, some businessman who had successfully taken over the local factory, or so Morris's mother told him. Tony didn't have a mother, instead, he had numerous stepmothers who changed every year. Tony's father loved beautiful women but had no interest in marrying them. He was an excellent manager, authoritative, audacious, and willing to forget his principles to get what he wanted. He raised Tony the same way, strictly and without sympathy. He often beat his son if Tony came home from school with bruises. Morris felt sorry for his friend. He wouldn't wish such a father on anyone. His own parents never hit him, and they scolded him reluctantly, usually just offering advice. When Morris would share the latest news from Tony about a new stepmother or his father's heavy belt with a large buckle, his mother would gasp. Then she would quietly say, "Morris, don't tell anyone else, okay? Otherwise, Tony's father will get angry and beat him even harder." So Morris kept quiet, wanting to protect his friend. Tony often visited Morris at his home, where his mother welcomed him warmly, fed him, and sent him off with homemade food. Tony would often say he felt at home at Morris's place and even saw Morris's mother as his own. Morris didn't mind sharing his home and his mother with someone who needed it. As they got older, the boys started thinking about new ways to make money. Washing cars didn't bring in enough for everything they wanted, especially since Morris now had a girlfriend, Lily. She was his classmate. Lily, so kind and quiet, began to stir feelings in him. Under her gaze, he would melt, and during conversations, he'd lose the ability to speak. He confessed his love to her at a Christmas party, and Lily reciprocated. The three of them, Morris, Lily, and Tony, began spending time together. Tony welcomed Morris's girlfriend without any jealousy. And when Morris suggested they look for a job, Tony quickly guessed. "You need money for flowers for Lily." Tony explained that his father had been making him work at the factory for a while, wanting him to learn all the ins and outs of the business by the time he was 20 so he could manage it. His father didn't want to hand over the reins to his son without putting him through the same tough path he had once walked himself, starting as a simple laborer. Morris agreed to work with him. Tony's father approved of his son's initiative, and within a month, both boys were working in the packaging department in the evenings. The work was easy but physically demanding. They had to carry heavy loads and stand for long periods. Morris was hired only after he brought in permission from his parents. Morris's father was against it. He said, "You shouldn't work for friends. It's not right." "I'm not working for Tony," Morris replied. His father frowned and argued, but couldn't find a good counterargument. Morris's mother supported him, gave her consent, and wrote the permission note. Morris earned well, so his father eventually came around, proud of his son's independence. Lily was proud of him too, especially when she received a bouquet from him every month and went on weekly dates to the cinema or a cafe. Tony didn't have anyone special. One day, Morris asked his friend what he spent his earnings on. Tony laughed. "You think my father pays me?" "No, of course not. He says he gives me the right to live in his house and gain invaluable experience. That's payment enough." This continued until they finished school. After graduation, Morris felt like a real adult. Without telling his parents or his friend, he proposed to Lily. He bought a ring with a small diamond, which he had been saving up for over the past 2 years, along with a bouquet. He invited Lily to a restaurant for a date, and at the right moment, he got down on one knee and asked, "Will you marry me?" Lily turned him down. They were still so young, how could they think about marriage? They needed to establish themselves first, get an education, find a job, buy a house, and a car. When Morris, disappointed, pointed out that his parents had married right after school, Lily responded, "And how are they living now? Is that what you want for yourself and your future children?" Morris gave in. He truly didn't want his children to face the same struggles he did, like working from the age of 7 just to afford chewing gum. He didn't hold a grudge against Lily. After dinner, he walked her home and then pawned the ring. Lily was accepted into medical school, as almost everyone in her family was a dentist. Tony was preparing to become a manager, so he enrolled in the appropriate program. Morris followed Tony's path because he wasn't sure what he wanted for himself. During Tony's second year of college, his father died suddenly in a car crash, along with his latest lover. All of his accounts, the apartment, the country house, and the factory were passed down to Tony. But along with the inheritance, Tony also received a significant amount of debt. Despite working at the factory for 4 years, he didn't fully understand all the intricacies of the business. Profits began to dwindle while the debts increased. Tony, who had initially felt a secret relief at his father's death, began to regret it. He wasn't prepared to take on such responsibility and manage an entire factory. Workers started to leave, not trusting the new, young boss, and they feared that wages would stop being paid. Morris noticed that his friend wasn't himself, skipping classes, looking unwell, and constantly anxious. He offered to help. The two of them spent nights in Tony's father's office, trying to untangle the complex supply and sales schemes. They learned together how to handle tax documentation. Tony was grateful for Morris's help and offered him the position of deputy manager. Morris agreed. Torn between school and work, the friends, without discussing it, chose work and dropped out of college. Morris's parents disapproved of his decision. "If Tony kicks you out tomorrow, where will you go?" Morris's father lamented. "You're nobody. He can afford to do this, but you can't." Morris didn't listen to his father and just brushed him off. "Dad, everything will be fine." With Morris's involvement, the factory began to thrive. The staffing shortage was quickly resolved, salaries were paid on time, and any broken equipment was repaired within a day. The factory didn't stand idle and started turning a profit. A year later, Tony gave Morris a brand new car for his birthday. Morris was stunned by his friend's generosity and hesitated to accept such an expensive gift, but Tony insisted. "You were there when the fifth graders teased me. You were there when my father died and creditors were after me. You deserve this. It's the least I can give you." Morris got his driver's license and started picking Lily up in the car. She was thrilled, as were her parents. While most of her classmates had boyfriends who were still students, she had a young entrepreneur with his own car. "Soon, he'll buy an apartment too," Lily's mother would say. "Hold on to him, men like that are rare nowadays." And Lily did hold on. But increasingly, as she later admitted to Morris, she realized that the youthful infatuation she once felt was gone. She liked Morris as a friend, but after he proposed, she understood that she could never accept him as a partner. She was too afraid to tell him and secretly harbored feelings for Tony. Tony, too, began showing interest in his best friend's girlfriend, and eventually, Morris caught them kissing outside Lily's house. He was shocked and told his mother everything. She spent a long time cursing Tony and Lily, wanting to confront them and tell them what she thought of them. Morris convinced her to calm down and went to see Lily alone. When she opened the door, not suspecting why Morris was there, she didn't let him in. "We have guests. Can you come by later?" "I know about you and Tony," Morris replied as he pushed past a stunned Lily and entered the house. Tony, who had come out of the kitchen at the sound of their voices, wasn't wearing a shirt. Morris understood everything but still decided to clarify. He calmly sat at the table and invited Tony and Lily to sit next to him. Then he asked, "Are you two together?" "Yes," they both replied. "For how long?" "A week," Lily blushed. "Why didn't you tell me?" Morris asked Tony. "I wanted to," Tony stammered, "but I didn't know how." He was searching for the right words, waiting for the right moment. Morris asked for a glass of water, and Lily obliged. He emptied the glass, set it on the table, wished Lily and Tony luck, and then left. He never saw Lily again, but he met Tony at work the next morning. Tony cautiously asked him, "Everything okay? Are we still friends?" Morris nodded. They shook hands, and soon the incident was forgotten. Morris, however, held a deep-seated grudge against Lily, who had so easily cut him out of her life after so many years together. After that, Morris threw himself into work. On weekends, he visited his parents or went out drinking with Tony. But Tony increasingly declined such outings. He was married now, with a young wife waiting for him at home. No, not Lily. He and Lily had broken up after 6 months together. Then she finished her studies and left somewhere. Morris bought his father a car. And for himself, he bought an apartment, renovated it, and started going to the gym and playing golf to make new, useful connections and unwind. Finally, he fulfilled an old dream. He started traveling. During one of these trips, as he was admiring snow-capped mountain peaks outside his window, his phone rang. It was Tony. "Get back here immediately, we have a problem." Morris bought a return ticket and was at the factory in Tony's office by evening. Tony was drunk but managed to explain that they had been set up by competitors. They had swapped out a batch of pickles with expired ones. People got poisoned, botulism. It was serious, there could be casualties. Morris was terrified and began thinking about what to do. He wanted to call the lawyers, but Tony stopped him. "Don't. We don't know how many of those bastards have their people at your factory. They could even be among the lawyers. So, what do you suggest? Morris asked. Tony smirked. We need to hide the evidence. Are you out of your mind? Morris exclaimed. You're suggesting we go against the investigation. That's illegal. I'm just saying we should move all the documents to a safe place, find some trusted lawyers, and give the documents to them, Tony said, rubbing his forehead. You understand? Morris agreed that there was some logic in his friend's words. Fool. He fell for such a simple manipulation. They packed all the documents into 2 suitcases. Morris loaded them into the trunk and drove home. On the way, the police stopped him, asked for his ID, and requested he open the trunk. Morris got nervous but decided to comply. When the officers found the documents, they sternly asked. What's this? Factory documents, Morris shrugged. They handcuffed him and took him to the station. What happened next was standard procedure. Tony testified that Morris acted on his own, trying to cover up his own crime. Morris was charged with intentional harm and sentenced to 5 years in a penal colony. He was released on parole after serving his time. He's 36 now. His father had a stroke when Morris was arrested. He died. His mother didn't live to see his release either. She passed away a year after his father, her heart couldn't take it. Their apartment first passed to Morris, then to the bailiffs. Morris visits his parents' graves and asks for forgiveness for being the reason for their untimely deaths. Sam teared up listening to him. Yeah. We were both betrayed by those we trusted the most. Well, Morris smiled, don't blame yourself for being trusting, because I don't. There's nothing wrong with trusting someone. The problem is when that trust is abused. He fell silent, lost in thought. Sam put on the kettle and took out a piece of cake she had saved in the fridge. They drank tea, ate cake from the same plate, and discussed their plans for the future. Morris wanted to find a job, but he was adamantly against renting a room or apartment. Where would I leave Manny? And all the others? I've grown attached to them over time. So, Sam said in surprise, you live on the street just so you don't abandon your dogs? Of course. And because I don't have any money, Morris laughed, but I will soon. Sam looked at Morris closely. He had once been a handsome man. His facial features were noble, that much was clear. Sam offered Morris some help. Let's get you some new clothes, and you could use a haircut too. Sam believed that if Morris looked more presentable, he could land a better job than just working at a construction site, maybe even at a factory. He considered her suggestion reasonable and agreed, but with one condition: he would repay every cent she spent on him with his first paycheck. Sam also set her own condition: Morris would no longer live on the streets. They found a house on the outskirts of town through an online ad and went to check it out together. The house was being rented by a sweet elderly lady. She lived in one half of the house, while the other half was vacant. Morris liked the place. There was a large yard with plenty of space for Manny. Sam paid for 2 months of rent. Morris and Sam then headed back to the city. First, they went to a barber where Morris got a haircut, shaved off his beard, and had his eyebrows trimmed. Afterward, they visited a boutique where they bought a couple of shirts, pants, a jacket, and also picked out a leather briefcase, a sturdy belt, and a pair of shoes. They even stopped by a store to buy a mobile phone. After changing into his new clothes, Morris admired himself in the mirror. Meanwhile, Sam thought of Irene and decided to call her while Morris was selecting a cologne at the cosmetics store. Irene was delighted to hear from her. Sam. I thought you'd never call again. How have you been? Everything's good, Sam replied. Just out shopping with a friend. Tomorrow, I'll start job hunting. A friend? Irene asked nervously. Not Robert, I hope. No, his name is Morris. He's a good guy. Sam then told her old friend how she had met Morris. After hearing the story, Irene gasped. That poor man. Does he know that you're wealthy? Is he hanging around you for your money? No, Sam laughed. I doubt it. He knows I have a little bit saved up. I told him I've been putting some money aside. Irene was relieved to hear that. It meant that Morris had gotten close to Sam and not for financial gain, unlike Robert had before. They chatted for a bit longer, and before hanging up, Irene invited Sam and her new friend over for tea that weekend. Morris returned to Sam just as she was putting her phone away and proudly showed off the bag with his new cologne. All done, bought it. We've been invited for tea this weekend by an old friend. Irene? Yes. What do you think? I'm in, Morris smiled. I haven't been a guest anywhere in what feels like forever. They decided to end the day with a celebratory dinner at a restaurant. When Morris looked at the menu, he glanced at Sam with concern. Will we have enough money? We will, she replied with a playful twinkle in her eye. For dinner, at least. And you're going to pay me back later, right? That's the deal. They ordered pasta, steaks, and wine. That evening, as the street outside was filled with the noise of cars stuck in traffic, Sam and Morris each took their respective buses and headed home. Once back in her apartment, Sam immediately set about removing all traces of the dog's presence in the house. Comfortably settled in her chair after cleaning up, she began searching for job openings. She found a few that suited her and applied to them. Sam decided not to mention her criminal record on her resume, hoping no one would ask about it. This turned out to be the right decision. She was invited to 2 companies for interviews, one for a bookkeeping position and the other for a secretary role. The next morning, she called Morris. He was already on his way to his first interview at some marketing company. Sam got ready, put on a formal blouse and skirt, and headed out for her own interview. A friendly receptionist greeted her at the entrance and escorted her to an office. Behind a large oak desk sat a woman with her hair neatly slicked back. When she saw Sam, she barely smiled and motioned to the chair in front of her. Good morning. You're Sam, right? Please, have a seat. They spent a long time discussing Sam's experience with financial reporting, dealing with tax authorities, and resolving related issues. Then they talked about the specifics of working as a bookkeeper at this particular company. The HR representative liked Sam. She leaned back in her chair and said, Sam, you have the necessary experience and education. That's rare. You can get a list of documents needed for employment from the secretary, a copy of your passport, your diploma, of course. And a criminal record certificate. That's mandatory. Sam flinched. The moment she had been dreading had arrived. Is something wrong? Well, Sam replied hesitantly, I do have a criminal record. The woman across from her leaned forward, frowning. Oh. Why didn't you mention that in your application? What were you convicted of? Fraud. The woman sighed. That's something you should disclose up front, so as not to waste your time or ours. I'm sorry, but you're not a good fit for us. But I'm not guilty. Goodbye, the woman said, opening a folder of documents. Sam got up from her chair, said goodbye, and left the office. Once outside, she could no longer hold back her tears. It was so unfair. She was the victim, not the criminal. She had been framed. Why did people see her as a criminal, only seeing what they wanted to see? Calming herself down, Sam washed her face and fixed her makeup and hair in the restroom of a nearby cafe. Then she looked up the next address she needed to visit that day. The office of the company was on the outskirts of the city, which gave Sam some hope. Small companies usually aren't picky about hiring someone with a criminal record. The journey was long, requiring 2 bus transfers. Sam bought a sandwich to take with her, sat by the window, and began to mentally prepare herself. You'll get the job. You're a good worker. If not here, then somewhere else. When she got off at the right stop, she looked around. It was an industrial area, and there wasn't even a proper asphalt road. She walked, her heels stumbling over the gravel, towards a building that looked more like a shopping center than the office of a construction company. At the entrance, she was met by an unfriendly security guard. When he learned that Sam was there for a job interview, he quickly stubbed out his cigarette, opened the doors, and escorted her to the boss's office. The boss was a young guy with messy hair, darting from one shelf to another, searching for something. He glanced at Sam and the guard and said, "You can go, Mike, thanks." Mike left, and Sam stood awkwardly in the doorway. The young man looked at her again. "So, you're Sam. Nice to meet you. I'm Oliver. Let's get this interview over with quickly. What's your experience? Where have you worked?" Still standing in the doorway, Sam patiently and thoroughly explained her experience as an accountant. She didn't mention the boutique or her criminal record. The young man listened, nodding. "Great, great. You're just what we need. You can start right away." Sam smiled awkwardly. "Start? What do you mean?" "You're hired, Sam. Could you make me some coffee?" "Thanks." "Shouldn't we sign a contract?" she asked, frowning. "A contract?" The young man laughed. "Sam, you probably don't quite understand where you are or what's going on here. You're from a different generation. Let me explain. We're a startup." "I know what a startup is," Sam interrupted him. "Perfect. So, you understand that at the early stages, signing a contract isn't possible because the company's revenue is unstable, as are the expenses, right?" Sam understood everything but clarified just in case. "So, you're not going to pay me?" "Of course I will," the guy said, offended. "Just not right away." She smiled, thanked him for his time, and left. The security guard gave her a gloomy look as she walked out. She heard the young man's voice behind her. "Mike, make some coffee." Sam took the bus home, eating her sandwich and quietly laughing as she thought about the startup founder. What was he expecting? Well, there's probably someone out there willing to work under those conditions. For the idea. Mike is working, after all. At home, she kicked off her shoes and sank into a hot bath. Her phone rang. She answered. "Yes. Congratulate me," Morris's voice came through. "I didn't get the job." She burst into laughter. "Neither did I. I went to 2 interviews today. It's a nightmare," Morris sighed. "Sorry, Sam, but I guess I'll have to go back to construction. I know you believe in me, but belief alone won't put food on the table." Sam stared at the bubbles popping in the bath for a while, then an idea struck her. She asked Morris. "Tell me, would you be willing to deceive someone for me?" He hesitated. "It depends on what kind of deception you mean." "I won't deceive old people or children." Sam smiled. "I mean deceiving my ex-husband." Sam knew from Irene that Robert wasn't doing well. Because of this, he and Melanie were constantly fighting, and everyone in town knew about it. So it was logical to assume that people were abandoning a sinking ship. Robert's firm was likely experiencing a staff shortage. If Morris could just get a job with Robert, he'd have access to all the documents and could search the archives for evidence of Robert's guilt and Sam's innocence. Morris listened to her plan and concluded. "It's worth a try. I've got nothing to lose, and I'd like to repay you somehow." "Tomorrow, you're going to Robert's for an interview," Sam said with a satisfied smile. "Wear a watch. He likes people with money." Sam knew that a watch alone wouldn't be enough. So she instructed Morris to embellish his background a bit. Not to mention that he'd been betrayed by a friend. To make himself look like a scoundrel in Robert's eyes, just like Robert himself. Morris remembered Sam's instructions and began preparing for the unexpected interview. Meanwhile, after her bath, Sam returned to job hunting, this time honestly marking that she had a criminal record. No responses came through, but the rejections started pouring in one after another. She felt utterly defeated. As she lay down to sleep, Sam tried to calculate how long her mother's savings would last. 10 years. And then what? Would she have to grab any job she could, just to get paid, like Morris was doing? Risk everything, endure humiliation, beg, accept unfair treatment, only to end up on the streets with a dog as her only companion, because the dog was the only one who treated her with any dignity? The thought did not comfort her. She promised herself that if she didn't find a job by the end of the month, she would go back to school. A convicted accountant wasn't wanted anywhere, but maybe a seamstress or a florist. Why not? With these thoughts, she fell asleep. The next morning, she was woken up by a call from Morris. He was already on his way to Robert's office and was extremely nervous. Sam laughed and told him, "Morris, lie like my life depends on it, got it?" There was no news from him all day, and Sam was on edge. She kept checking her phone, hoping to see an incoming call. Nothing. She tried looking for job listings but couldn't focus. The plan was brilliant, getting someone on the inside of Robert's company, finding the evidence, and clearing her name. Such a chance only comes once in a lifetime. What if Morris didn't get the job? She didn't even want to think about it. She went grocery shopping, made lunch, and then took a walk in the local park, watching the swans dance on the lake. Still, Morris didn't call. Sam phoned Irene, shared the plan she and Morris had come up with, and promised to visit over the weekend. Finally, the long-awaited call came. It caught Sam in the elevator. She answered, but the signal was weak, and the call dropped. She hurried back to her apartment, fumbling with the keys, burst through the door, and immediately called Morris. He picked up almost instantly. "Yes," he said. "Well?" Sam asked, burning with anticipation. "I just got home. Your Robert and I drank brandy for 2 hours. He talked my ear off. Complained about his Melanie. Apparently, she's quite the witch. Did you get the job?" Sam asked. "Yes." She jumped up in victory. Morris mentioned he was drunk, exhausted, and just wanted to sleep. He promised to call in the morning before work to give her all the details. Sam fell asleep with a sense of impending victory. The next morning, Morris did call. He recounted everything in detail, how he arrived at the office, waited half an hour for the secretary, and then another 2 for Robert himself. Robert finally showed up in a very disheveled state, reeking of alcohol. Walking into the room where Morris was waiting, he didn't hesitate at all. He emptied a water jug, washed his face with the last bit, and slicked back his hair. Then he sat in his chair and asked haughtily, "Who are you?" "I'm Morris. I'm here about the deputy position." Robert gave him a disdainful look. But when he noticed the watch, his demeanor suddenly changed, and he straightened up. "Well, Morris, I'm terribly sorry you caught me in such a state. This isn't a common occurrence, I assure you. We were celebrating a small family event yesterday. Please, forgive me." He then began asking Morris about his work experience. Morris explained how, 10 years ago, he had helped turn around a failing business and had significant experience in similar situations. Robert gave him a sly smile. "What makes you think, Morris, that we need your help? Your business isn't doing too well," Morris shrugged, "and you don't need to be an expert to notice that. I really like your approach, and besides, I need the money." Robert laughed at Morris's bluntness. "Money. Everyone needs money, my friend. Be careful with such statements," Morris warned. "I once paid dearly for my ambitions, but I don't intend to repeat those mistakes." He told Robert about how, 10 years ago, he was offered a way to simplify the production process to turn a profit. He agreed. Unfortunately, this led to tragic consequences. Customers were poisoned by substandard products. And what did his partner do? He pinned all the blame on Morris, and now lives well, running a factory that would have closed long ago if not for Morris. Robert whistled. "Was that Tony?" I know him. They say his business isn't doing well." "No surprise," Morris replied. Robert looked at him with interest. "So, you're willing to step on others to make a profit?" "Money likes a tough approach," Morris shrugged, "especially in tough times." Robert nodded in agreement. "Yes, you're right. It's a shame not everyone understands that." They talked a bit more, and at the end, Robert said he was willing to hire Morris for the deputy position, despite his criminal record. According to Robert, it even played in their favor because now Morris knew how to avoid getting caught. After the conversation, Robert invited Morris for a drink. Morris agreed. They went to a bar where, besides alcohol, there were many dancers in provocative outfits. After the bar, Robert told Morris to start working, while he went home to sleep. Morris returned to the office and, honestly, sat down with the paperwork for several hours, trying to shake off the growing intoxication. It didn't work, of course. The alcohol took over, and he fell asleep. In the evening, after a good rest, he woke up and went home. He took a folder with last year's profit reports to study at home. He spent the rest of the night going through the numbers and could now confidently say that Robert was indeed facing losses. It seems Sam's trial not only ruined her reputation but also damaged Robert's business. Few people would want to deal with an online platform that has dissatisfied thousands of customers who felt deceived. Sellers were also long upset about being forced to sell counterfeit goods. Morris spent the whole night trying to figure out how to return the company to profitability. The best idea he could come up with was to collaborate with shady brands and sellers under the guise of legitimate ones. For example, he explained to Sam, some people refill empty bottles of original perfume with high-quality knockoffs. The customer is satisfied, the experts are satisfied, and the online platform makes money from the sales. She praised him and wished him luck. "Just don't forget you're pretending," she urged, "don't actually become a scoundrel." He laughed and hung up. Sam decided to visit her mother's grave. She wanted to make sure the cemetery worker had kept his promise to tidy it up. Just in case, she put a pair of gloves in her bag. The train was almost empty again. There were few visitors wandering around the cemetery. Sam was pleased to see that her mother's grave looked neat and well kept. She heard a familiar voice in the distance. "Oh, it's you. I've done everything, come take a look." They sat on a bench for a while. Sam handed the old man a box of chocolates as a token of gratitude. He thanked her and left. Sam stayed to talk to her mother, sharing the events of the past 3 years of her life, how difficult it had been in prison. But life on the outside was even harder, having to relearn simple things. She had gotten used to the harsh treatment in prison, and she thought it would be different in the free world. Her imagination painted pictures of happy people welcoming her. But reality was different. People enjoyed her company as long as she had status, money, and a flawless reputation. After prison, the few acquaintances she met on the street avoided her and pretended not to recognize her. This shocked her. That's why she was doubly grateful for her friendship with Morris. She didn't care about the traitors from her past who showed no compassion for her after she lost her child and her life's work. But she trusted Morris, believed he was a good person. His betrayal would forever destroy her trust in people. Her mother looked at her silently from the photograph, seemingly understanding everything. As Sam was heading back, Morris called. He said he held up well and even met with potential partners. Robert wasn't impressed with his idea, having considered it himself before. What held him back was the lack of a scapegoat to blame if things went wrong. Morris thought that scapegoat would be him. He would drag things out as long as possible, but they needed to hurry and find something incriminating on Robert. Because entering into potentially criminal deals and ending up in prison again was the last thing Morris wanted. Sam suggested starting with the archive, but Morris disappointed her. "I don't have access to the archive." "You're the assistant manager, how do you not have access?" "The keys are with Robert." Sam thought for a moment. If Robert was that concerned about the archive, then there was definitely something important there. Morris promised to get the keys and dig through the archive. Sam wasn't going to just sit around either. She came up with a plan. She dressed modestly and headed to the boutique. Before that, she stopped by a store to buy a couple of bugs. Melanie's car was parked at the entrance. Sam confidently walked up the steps and went inside. A sales associate approached her with a lazy stride. "Good evening. I need to see Melanie," Sam said firmly. "Is she here?" "Melanie is in her office, but she's unlikely to see you." Sam didn't let the girl finish, pushed her aside, and went to the office that once belonged to her. Melanie was sitting on the desk, playfully twirling a lock of hair around her finger, talking to someone. Seeing Sam, she paled and hung up the phone. "Sam." "Hello, Melanie. How are you?" Sam put her hands in her pockets and started looking around the office. Sometimes she touched a picture frame or the clock. Everything had changed so much. Melanie had no sense of style. Melanie recovered and gave a sickly sweet smile, watching her former friend. "Did you get out?" "Yes, my sentence is over." "Are you here for revenge?" Melanie laughed awkwardly. "Are you going to kill me?" Sam rolled her eyes. "No, why would I? I just stopped by for old time's sake." "I see you have a new sign." Melanie rang a bell and asked one of the sales associates to make them some coffee. "How have you been?" Sam asked. "I heard you got married." Melanie, gaining confidence, started telling how wonderfully she and Robert were living in his house. Audrey had married some oligarch and moved to Bavaria with him. Robert had made a good profit, and her collection was successful. Sam stayed silent, deliberately looking miserable. Then she asked, "Melanie, don't you feel ashamed?" "Ashamed?" Melanie asked, surprised. "For what?" "You slept with my husband." Melanie winced. "Sam, Robert and I talked about this many times. He was sure that sooner or later you two would have divorced anyway. The spark was gone. But with me, he still has that spark." "I lost a child," Sam reminded her. "And you two sent me to prison. For your schemes, of which I knew nothing." "Come on." Melanie laughed. "You knew about Robert from the start. You just didn't pay attention. And you knew about the profits, otherwise you wouldn't have trusted me with the management." "And the child?" Melanie smiled cruelly. "It's good you lost the child back then. Imagine if he'd been born in prison, what kind of future would he have had?" Sam was boiling with anger. She felt a strong urge to grab Melanie by the hair and drag her around the room, to wipe that smug smile off her face. This woman had caused Sam so much pain, yet she didn't recognize her guilt at all. Sam forced herself to calm down, but rebellious tears still streamed down her cheeks. Melanie sighed. "Please, spare me the tears, Sam. They won't work on me. I have work to do, sorry." Sam left the office, wiping away her tears. The sales associates gave her smug looks as she walked by. She called a taxi and was burning with impatience the whole way home. At home, she turned on her laptop and put on her headphones. The bug worked perfectly. Melanie was complaining to Robert about her. "Can you imagine, she came in the middle of the day. I wouldn't show my face if I were her. How shameless. I'll make sure the whole town knows about her tomorrow. Let her squirm." Sam took out her headphones, turned up the volume, and went to make dinner, listening to Melanie's rant. A couple of years ago, she might have found such behavior unacceptable. How could she eavesdrop on someone else's conversations? But the meeting with Melanie convinced Sam that with people like her, you have to play by their rules. Later in the evening, while Sam was searching for a job, Robert unexpectedly showed up in his new wife's office. She didn't greet him warmly. "You're drunk again." "Sweetheart, don't be rude," Robert said. "I'm so tired." Then you should have gone home. Why did you come here? Robert sighed heavily and sank into a chair. After your call, I started thinking about the past, how Sam and I lived. And you know, she was more beautiful, admitted, and smarter. Life with her was interesting. But with you? What is this? What are you wearing? And that mole, I asked you to cover it up with something. Sam put down her phone and turned up the volume. Melanie started to cry. Robert sighed again. Tears, always tears. And then you wonder why I cheat on you. You scoundrel, Robert. Melanie cried out, sobbing. After a brief silence, Sam heard the sound of a slap and flinched. Robert shouted. You hysterical woman. Get a grip. Look at you. Other men have proper wives, and what do I have? A worn-out drunk. What, are you going to drink all night again? No, Melanie sobbed, I won't. I'm sorry, Robert. Go to hell. The door slammed shut, and Melanie broke down in tears. Unable to listen to her crying any longer, Sam turned down the volume. So, that's how it is. The facade of happiness was gone. Robert had crushed Melanie just like he did to her, making her his next victim. What had he promised her to make her fall for him? Probably something about undying love and unimaginable wealth. Well, let her enjoy it. After all, everyone gets what they deserve. However, Sam hadn't bugged the place just to confirm their misery. She needed to find something that could help prove her innocence. The sound of a bottle being uncorked made her turn up the volume again. Melanie was quickly getting drunk. There was a knock on the door. Melanie, may I come in? Come in, Melanie said. Maybe you shouldn't drink, the girl, whom Sam recognized as the boutique assistant, asked timidly. I have to, darling, I have to, Melanie replied, pouring another glass of wine. Did you hear what he said? Did you hear? How can I not drink? Melanie spoke a lot, rambling on as she tried to convince the assistant that she was perfectly fine and could drink as much as she wanted. Then, she started to open up, and what she said shocked Sam but also gave her a glimmer of hope. Melanie began by criticizing Sam, claiming that she never appreciated Robert, and that he had been unhappy with Sam. That's why he started making obvious advances toward Melanie. He got her number under the pretense of work and initially called about business, but then he began messaging her in the evenings, demanding she send intimate photos. This virtual affair excited Melanie. When they saw each other in person, Robert pretended nothing was happening between them, but at night, he passionately confessed his feelings to her. She had never had such a persistent and passionate admirer. At first, she felt ashamed for betraying Sam, but that feeling soon gave way to pride. After all, Robert had chosen her over Sam, this beautiful woman with a perfect figure. Robert fueled Melanie's pride, assuring her that Sam couldn't compare to her, that Melanie was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. He promised to divorce Sam and marry her. But then Sam got pregnant. Robert hesitated for a long time and ultimately decided to delay the divorce for the sake of the child. He wanted an heir, and Melanie could no longer have children. The news that Sam was expecting a girl deeply upset him, and he suggested that Melanie meet him in his office after work. She arrived, burning with desire. They fell upon each other with animalistic passion, occasionally glancing at the closed door, afraid of being caught. But soon, they grew bolder. Sam was too unwell to leave the house. Robert had completely lost interest and attraction toward her, while his interest in Melanie only grew. One evening, Robert called Melanie and informed her that sales were declining. They needed to come up with something. Melanie wanted to consult with Sam, but Robert stopped her. We can handle this without Sam. She's too soft and doesn't understand anything about sales. They talked for an hour and concluded that producing clothing from natural fabrics was burdensome under the current conditions. Sam would never agree to replace silk with synthetics. So, Robert wanted to execute the plan behind her back and then, once the profits increased, present it to his wife as a done deal. Melanie agreed to help him, prepared all the necessary documents, and slipped them to Sam for signing. Then she watched. It seemed strange to her that Robert didn't inform the salespeople about the change in fabric composition. Although the price had slightly decreased, it was still too high for synthetic dresses. Robert reassured her. "Sales are happening, let's just wait." They waited for a month, then another. Finally, Melanie couldn't take it anymore and asked Robert if it was legal to deceive customers like this. He laughed. "I thought, Melanie, you were smarter than Sam. Don't lower yourself to her level. Business isn't honest if it's profitable, not if it's losing money." By that time, they were already having an affair. The comparison to Sam, not in her favor, worked. Melanie agreed to the fraud. After all, Sam was the one legally responsible, she had nothing to worry about. She took a few sips of wine and mentioned that Robert had noticed Sam from the beginning only because she was a tempting target. Her new brand was growing rapidly, with so many loyal customers. Meanwhile, Robert's platform was losing profits. He couldn't understand why for a long time, even though he tried to follow his father's business principles. Then he realized he was just too naive. There's no such thing as an honest business. Robert started looking for new partners, focusing not on the quality of their products but on how skillfully they sold knockoffs as originals. Profits began to rise. And with Sam among the partners, they skyrocketed. Robert's platform became a monopoly, the only place where Sam's brand could be purchased. Prices could be inflated, and the dresses would still sell out within the first day of arrival. This pleased him but wounded his pride. Sam ran her business honestly and made money, while he barely broke even, despite all the shady dealings. So, a plan began to form in his mind. How could he prove to this upstart that all her success was just luck? He waited for a sales slump and convinced Melanie to switch fabric suppliers. That's when the decline of the brand began. When Sam was imprisoned, her dresses continued to sell for a while, but soon even those rare sales stopped. Robert was ecstatic. He had finally defeated his competitor. Sam shivered. So, she had never been loved. Robert married her only to destroy her. She knew her ex-husband wasn't a model of virtue, but how could anyone be so cruel? Meanwhile, Melanie had gotten completely drunk and started threatening Robert. "I could just take all his shady deals to Sam. I know he keeps everything, just in case any of his current partners ever threaten him or report him. He won't go down alone, he'll drag everyone down with him. Including you," the advisor reminded her. Melanie laughed. "I'm not afraid of anything. If I have to go to prison just to see that smug idiot behind bars, I'm willing. You get that? I'm willing." Sam didn't listen any further. She turned down the volume and called Morris. He was already on his way home. She told him where Robert kept all the information on his previous deals. Morris was surprised. "How do you know?" he asked. "I just do," Sam evaded the question. "I'll tell you if we manage to get him arrested. I can't talk about it now." He didn't press her further and promised to try to access his boss's computer as soon as possible. At home, his loyal dog, Morris, was waiting for him. His elderly neighbor had given Morris a doghouse that belonged to her late dog, so now he had a home of his own. Morris fed him, played with him for a bit, patted him on the neck, and went inside the house. He hadn't spent a night outside in several days. It was astonishing how quickly he had adapted to his new, somewhat uncomfortable life when he first found himself on the streets after his release. Now, he had just as quickly grown accustomed to comfort again, shaving, showering, sleeping in a bed with clean sheets, and wearing fresh clothes. Prison had been hard. He hadn't told Sam about it because he didn't want to burden her with his memories. But they were heavy. Endless fear for his life accompanied Morris throughout his entire sentence. He was an outsider in the prison environment, a good boy who had ended up behind bars by pure chance. People like him weren't liked there. He was beaten, and his life was threatened just because he was weaker. Morris tried to fight back, worked out intensely in the cramped conditions of the cell, but it didn't make a difference. When 10 huge inmates wrapped you in a blanket and beat you in the middle of the night, you start to realize your powerlessness. And Morris did realize it. In the second year of his sentence, when he heard the news of his mother's death, he lost all hope and any reason to live. Before, he had wanted to endure everything for his mother, to get out and see her again, to hug her. But after her death, that glimmer of hope faded. Morris understood that things would never be the same. He had been robbed of the past he cherished. No parents, no home. Just 2 lonely graves. He probably survived only because of that realization. No one else cared about those graves but him. Sam had said that her goal was to get out and visit her mother's grave, not to seek revenge. Morris understood her. The first thing he did after his release was rush to the cemetery. He hadn't been allowed to attend his parents' funerals, so he couldn't be there. He picked 2 large bunches of flowers from the nearest field and brought them to the graves. He pulled out the weeds. And then he cried for a long time. He asked his parents for forgiveness. Morris didn't like to recall this period of his life. Living on the streets and running from the police was preferable to wallowing in self-blame. But over time, the toll of his vagrant life began to show. His back and stomach started to ache. Sometimes, Morris would catch a glimpse of his reflection in a storefront window and feel a wave of horror, as he hardly resembled the man who had walked out of the courthouse that day. The old Morris had loved life and cherished the gift his parents had given him. The new Morris despised it and devalued that gift. So, when Sam offered him a chance at redemption, Morris saw her as an angel. On his own, he could never have returned to his former life. He lacked both the money and the strength. Lying in a warm bed, he silently thanked Sam and fate for bringing them together, and he vowed to help ensure that those who had wronged her would face justice. The next morning, Morris woke up to find that, despite not sleeping on concrete, he had caught a bad cold. His health had deteriorated in prison, and now, even the slightest chill made him sick. He had a fever, chills, a runny nose, and a headache. Nevertheless, he forced himself to get up and headed to the bus stop. It was a Friday, and a nasty, icy rain was pouring down. By the time he arrived at the office, he was thoroughly soaked and sneezed loudly in the lobby. The secretary glanced at Morris and pulled her sweater collar up over her face, seemingly to protect herself from the germs. He smiled at her. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she replied, her voice muffled by the sweater. Morris closed the door to his office behind him, took off his jacket, and collapsed weakly onto the couch. He wasn't in any shape to work today. After thinking for a moment, he dampened a handkerchief with water, laid down again, and placed the compress on his forehead. He fell asleep and was awakened by the sound of someone bursting through the door. It was Robert. "Oh, colleague." Robert laughed as he sat down next to Morris on the couch. "Looks like you were out partying all night." "Yeah," Morris smiled weakly and winced, "I've got a headache." "Well, I've got some excellent brandy that'll help with that," Robert winked. "Come by my office in an hour. I overdid it last night too. Had a fight with my wife. Look at this." Robert pulled his shirt collar aside to reveal scratch marks on his neck. "Can you believe what a little vixen she is?" Morris looked at Robert's red, bloated face, trying to see the aristocratic and refined man that Sam had described. According to her, her ex-husband had the appearance of a scoundrel, a heartbreaker. Maybe he did look like that once, Morris thought, but there's nothing aristocratic about him now. Robert noticed his gaze and raised an eyebrow in question. "What, is my face scratched up too, and I didn't notice?" "No," Morris reassured him, "I'm just not fully awake yet." "If you sleep too much, I'll fire you," Robert joked, wagging his finger before standing up to stretch his neck. "Just kidding. But seriously, get to work. Our partners from China are arriving today with the sneakers. We need that contract, got it? Got it. He left the office. Morris needed to get the documents quickly and make a run for it. Otherwise, Robert would definitely start getting suspicious. The supplier of the counterfeit shoes was visiting Morris for the second time. The first time, Morris had refused to sign off on the deal, wanting to review the terms first. But today, they would clearly expect him to sign. Morris sat at his desk, pretending to be engrossed in work. An hour later, he went to Robert's office, but Robert wasn't there. Morris sat down at the desk and scanned the monitor. Nothing seemed suspicious. He quickly inserted a USB drive into the computer and began copying all the files. Nervously glancing at the door, he tapped his fingers on the desk. The program informed him that it would take 5 minutes to complete the copying. Morris got up and began pacing the office, his mind racing through different scenarios of what could happen next. He was ready to fight for Sam if necessary. Robert was still nowhere to be seen. Suddenly, Morris heard his voice right outside the door. He reacted quickly, sitting down on the couch. Robert entered the office, but he wasn't alone, he was with the shoe supplier. Robert frowned when he saw Morris. "What are you doing here?" "We've been looking for you." "I came as you asked," Morris replied, extending his hand in greeting. The supplier shook his hand. Robert smacked his forehead. "Right. Joe, I invited him for some brandy. You in?" Robert walked over to the cabinet by the couch, took out glasses and a bottle of brandy. Joe, the supplier, smiled. "Sure." With a skillful hand, Robert dropped ice into the glasses and poured the liquor. Joe glanced at Morris. "What's wrong with you? Are you sick?" "He's sick," Robert answered for him. "Just like me. Last night, Melanie came at me with fists. Called me ungrateful. Me? Who would she be without me? And where?" He downed his drink. Joe and Morris followed suit. Robert looked at Morris. "So, what's the story?" Morris felt a pang of fear, like he'd been caught, but he kept his cool. "Story? Where you were, with whom, and why?" "With the ladies?" Joe licked his lips and smirked. "I wish," Morris replied. He quickly made up a story about his deceased father and the anniversary of his death. Both the supplier and Robert listened, slightly embarrassed. But in the end, they nodded sympathetically. "Nobody can replace a father," they agreed. "Yeah," Robert said, "mine was a real jerk. Always had a scowl on his face. But he was my father." All three of them fell silent. Morris felt bold enough to ask. "What was your father like?" Robert smirked. "Why the sudden interest?" "Just curious," Morris shrugged. "Mine was an honest teacher, earned little, believed that education was everything. And what was the result? I bought him his first car, and until his death, he thought my job was beneath me." He sighed theatrically. Robert shook his head. "Yeah, mine was the same. When he was still in charge, he checked every seller 100 times, reviewed every declaration. What good did it do? After he died, we hit a rough patch. I used to think he was a genius, and I was just a failure. I kept trying to figure out what I was doing wrong." "And did you?" Joe grinned. "I did," Robert laughed. "Now we make 5 times more than when my dad was alive." "Don't mention it," Joe raised his glass in a toast. They both looked at Morris. "So, will you sign the contract, pal?" the supplier asked. Morris smiled. "Of course." "All right then," Robert finished his drink. "I'll go have the documents prepared." "Finish your drinks and follow me, I'll be waiting. We'll celebrate this deal afterward." Joe quickly finished his whiskey, winked at Morris, and followed Robert out of the office. Morris waited until the door closed, then rushed to the computer. The copying was complete. He pulled out the USB drive and turned off the monitor to cover his tracks. He hid the drive in his pocket and left the office. Robert and Joe were standing by the secretary's desk, whispering about something. Morris needed to leave, but he couldn't think of how to do it. His body came to his rescue. Suddenly feeling nauseous, Morris ran to the nearest potted plant and threw up. Robert watched him in astonishment. "You really are something." "Sorry," Morris replied, as he bent over the plant again. He then headed to the restroom located on the first floor. Passing by Robert, he overheard him whispering to the supplier. "He's fool, can't you see? He'll sign everything, don't worry. We'll celebrate tonight." Morris rushed downstairs and ran. He hailed a taxi and asked to be taken to the city center. Once there, he ran toward Sam's house, blending into the crowd. Luckily, she was home, sitting at her laptop, listening in on what was happening in Melanie's office. When she opened the door, she grimaced. "Morris, what happened to you? What's that smell?" "Your ex-husband treated me to some brandy," he said apologetically, pulling the flash drive from his pocket. "Here, it's all here." Sam gasped. "You got it? The deal documents?" "Yes. And this," he pulled out a folded sheet with the original contract he hadn't forgotten to grab from his office. "This is the agreement for the supply of counterfeit sneakers disguised as originals." Sam took the sheet and eagerly started reading. Morris locked himself in the bathroom, where he spent a long time emptying his stomach and then washing his shirt and face. When he came out, he realized he was completely drained. He complained to Sam, who was sitting in the kitchen. "I think I'm sick." She put the contract aside, came over to him, and touched his forehead, her eyes widening. "Morris, you're burning up." She laid him down on the couch, brought a first aid kit, and made him take his temperature. "You have a fever." Morris didn't respond, weakly groaning something. She made him a cold compress for his forehead, gave him some pills, and a hot drink. Then she started cooking broth. While he slept, bundled up in 2 blankets, she continued listening in on Melanie and going through the contents of the flash drive. At first, she didn't find anything interesting. Sam was even a bit disappointed and scared. What if Morris hadn't managed to get what she needed? He wouldn't be able to go back, which meant the opportunity would be lost. But then she couldn't believe her eyes. She double-clicked on a folder and gasped. It contained all the illegal transactions. Sam scrolled to the very end and found her name. With trembling fingers, she opened the file. Copies of documents for the supply of cheap Chinese synthetics. Her signature was on everything. Copies of contracts for the sale of synthetic dresses disguised as luxury clothing. Robert's signature was on everything. She left the laptop open, leaned back in her chair, and began to think. Why did all the documents show that both were guilty of fraud, but only one was imprisoned? Does that even happen? Sam began to recall the court session. Melanie had always maintained her innocence and convinced the court that she had only followed Sam's orders. It was easy to believe this when you saw Melanie's signature on each contract. But what had Robert said? How had he justified himself? "I trusted my wife," Robert's words echoed in Sam's mind. Yes, exactly. He played the victim in court, and everyone believed him. How could they not, when his wife had made a full confession? Sam curled up into a ball, hugging her knees to her chest. She realized that even with the documents in her possession, proving her innocence would be impossible. After the shock of losing her child and the start of the investigation, she had taken all the blame upon herself. What a fool she had been. And her lawyer had convinced her to take that step. Sam lifted her head. What if that lawyer had been working for Robert? The thought sent a chill through her chest. Knowing Robert, it was easy to imagine him bribing a lawyer. She remembered how Robert had envied her and wanted to strip her of her fortune by any means necessary. The pieces of the puzzle came together in her mind. Morris opened his eyes and groaned. Sam brought him some water and then smiled. "Well, here you are groaning again, and I'm saving you." "Thanks," he smiled back, then added, "Manny is all alone there." "I can go see him," Sam reassured him. "Just sleep." And Morris fell asleep. And she drove to Morris's place and could already hear the mournful howling from the street. The elderly neighbor saw Sam and said, "Oh, the dog is howling and howling. I can't understand what it wants. It's not eating or drinking." Sam thanked her and apologized for the dog. She unlocked the door with Morris's key and went inside. Manny rushed to her and put his paws on her chest. Sam laughed and patted him on the head. "Hello there, handsome. Missing me?" Manny barked in agreement. Sam led him to his bowls of water and food. He ate, then lay down on his mat by the radiator. She sat with him for a while, then went back home. The evening city was alive with upbeat and loud music. Stylish couples walked hand in hand along the sidewalks. Sam felt cozy and calm. For the first time in a long while, her soul was at peace. She had learned who had framed her and for what purpose. She had a good chance of proving her innocence. She just needed to find the lawyer who had defended her in court and force him to confess to working with Robert. Sam spotted a stall with fresh fruit and berries. The friendly vendor weighed out a couple of lemons, oranges, and strawberries. As Sam paid and was about to leave, the vendor suddenly exclaimed, "Sam, is that you?" Sam jumped, looked at the vendor's face, and recognized Katie, one of her consultants from the boutique. She smiled widely. "Katie." "Sam." Katie ran out from behind the counter and threw her arms around her. "You're out." "Yes, I'm free now," Sam hugged her back. "I'm so sorry," Katie's eyes filled with tears. "All of this just seems so wrong." Sam nodded. "We all knew you were innocent," Katie continued. "That woman fired us all right after the trial. She was afraid of the truth. Look where I'm working now. This mess has affected all of us." Sam noticed how Katie, once a model of beauty, had gained weight and lost her looks. Her hands had become rough and calloused. Katie gave a sad smile. "But you're still the same, Sam. Just as beautiful." "Thank you," Sam said, her eyes welling up. "And thank you for the fruit." On the way home, she decided that if she ever reopened her boutique, she would definitely invite Katie to work there. She stayed up all night caring for Morris, changing compresses and bringing him water. By morning, his fever had come down, and he opened his eyes, feeling much better. Sam was relieved. She wanted to find a lawyer as soon as possible but couldn't bring herself to leave Morris alone in his condition. So, she made breakfast, ate, fed Morris, and then left. She decided to start her search at the local courthouse. She remembered both the first and last names of her lawyer. She entered the building and approached the reception desk. "Good afternoon, I'm looking for Aaron Brace." The receptionist smiled and checked the screen. "He has a hearing at 10 o'clock in the big courtroom." Sam headed to the courtroom and sat on an uncomfortable chair near the door to wait. It suddenly hit her, this was the exact courtroom where she had been tried. A shiver ran down her spine. Sam recalled the feeling of utter hopelessness she had felt walking into the courthouse 3 years ago. Now, she was stronger and wasn't about to give up easily. The session didn't last long. At 11 o'clock, the doors opened. Aaron and the other participants exited into the hallway. Sam approached him. "Hello. Do you remember me?" The lawyer raised an eyebrow. "No. I thought so," Sam smiled. "I need to talk to you privately." Aaron looked her over from head to toe. "Well, if it's necessary, come to my office." Sam followed him out of the courthouse, crossed the street, and they entered a shabby 2-story building. Aaron went up to the second floor and opened a squeaky door for her. "After you." She entered the cramped office, furnished with cheap furniture. Sad-looking blinds hung on the window. Sam sat down on the hard chair offered to her and asked for a glass of water. Aaron bustled around, but unable to find a glass or water, he rushed downstairs. As soon as he left the office, Sam pulled a bug out of her pocket, stood up, and quickly attached it behind the wall clock. Then she sat back down. Aaron returned with a plastic cup. Sam took a sip of water. "I was your client once. I'm Sam." The lawyer smiled as he sat down at his desk. "Nice name, but I don't remember you. Neither you nor your case." "I was tried for fraud," Sam continued. "My husband, Robert. You know him, don't you?" Aaron's smile faded. "Now I remember," he said grimly. "What do you want?" "I want to know why you insisted I plead guilty." Aaron laughed. "Well, Sam, in your case, it was the only option. Otherwise, the sentence would have been much harsher, you understand that." Sam shook her head. "You know, I consulted another lawyer. And he thinks you deliberately set me up to protect my husband." "Ex-husband," Aaron reminded her. "Listen, Sam, every lawyer has their methods. This was mine. You chose me, so you must have been fine with my methods. And now you're here to complain instead of thanking me." "But." "No buts," Aaron cut her off. "Leave. We have nothing more to discuss." Sam obediently left the office and hurried home. Just as she approached her apartment building, she noticed a familiar face. It was Robert. He had aged beyond recognition in the past 3 years, gained weight, and grown a beard. Upon seeing Sam, he waved and walked towards her. A chill ran down her spine. "Hello," Robert smiled. "I heard you got out recently. I decided to meet up." Sam forced a smile. "Don't you have work to do?" "No," Robert shrugged. "I had a bit of trouble yesterday. Imagine, I hired a new deputy, and he got drunk. We were supposed to sign a big contract, but he's been unreachable for a whole day, the scoundrel." Sam grew worried, unsure if Robert was joking or being serious, whether he knew about her and Morris or still believed the cover story. She walked around him and headed for the entrance. She was also concerned about how Robert knew where she lived. "Won't you invite me in for tea?" he asked. "No, I have things to do," Sam replied, and went inside. She quickly climbed to her floor, approached the window on the landing, and cautiously looked down. Robert was standing by the entrance, smoking. Then he stubbed out the cigarette, got into his car, and drove off. Sam burst into her apartment, locking the door behind her. Morris looked alarmed. "What happened?" "My ex-husband just asked me to invite him in for tea," Sam said with a nervous laugh. Then she found the right app on her phone and connected to the bug in Aaron's office. He was advising a man when suddenly, Melanie's shrill voice echoed from the laptop. "That scoundrel went to see her." Sam rushed to the laptop to turn up the volume. "Can you believe it? He actually told me. And then he yelled at me for not telling him she was out." "Do you think he wants to reconcile with her?" asked the consultant Sam had become familiar with. "Who knows what's going on in his head?" "Probably not," Melanie sobbed. "But why does he treat me like this? He constantly cheats on me. Don't I deserve to be treated right?" Melanie loudly blew her nose into a tissue. Morris, captivated, approached Sam and sat beside her, listening intently. He whispered. "So that's how you found out about the documents, right?" Sam nodded as Melanie continued. "After she left, I decided to follow her. I remembered the house number and all that. Yesterday, that idiot came home drunk and started reminiscing about his Sam. I told him, 'Your Sam lives in some dump.' He turned bright red and asked, 'How do you know?' He shook me until I gave him the address, the scoundrel." Melanie burst into tears. Sam lowered the volume and sighed with relief, one problem down. Morris glanced at the phone, where a man's voice could be heard. "Who's that?" he asked. "Aaron. My lawyer." "You're a real detective," Morris exclaimed in admiration. Sam laughed. "Let's make dinner. I don't want to leave the house today. Let's just spend the evening here, listening in. You okay with that?" Morris nodded in agreement. They ordered groceries and prepared dinner. Morris took charge of the cooking since Sam had a headache after seeing her ex-husband. She took a pill and lay down to rest. After finishing the meal, Morris stepped out into the hallway and called the neighbor, asking her to feed his dog. Then, he woke Sam, and they had dinner together. Later, they settled on the couch and started listening again. Melanie wasn't doing anything special, just crying, drinking wine, and working in silence. Aaron was meeting with clients and eagerly awaiting the next day. He always took Saturdays off. Sam was about to lie down again when Robert arrived at Aaron's office. "I'm here," Robert said. "What's so urgent?" Aaron shook his hand and closed the door. "Your ex-wife Sam was here." "When?" Sam could hear the fear in Robert's voice. "A few hours ago." "What did she want?" "She was upset that I made her confess. Said she consulted other lawyers, and they were surprised by my decision." Robert laughed, but it was a cold, sinister laugh. "Is she starting to figure things out?" "I think she knows about our little deal," Aaron whispered. "That you paid me to make sure she got locked up for a long time." Robert hissed. "Keep your voice down, you old fool." "We're safe here," the lawyer assured him. "It's secure." "So, what do we do now?" "I'd lie low for a while," Aaron yawned. "Maybe we should get rid of her," Robert suddenly suggested. A chill ran down Sam's spine. She grabbed Morris's hand, and he pulled her close, gently patting her back to calm her. Aaron laughed. "She has no money, no influence. What can she do?" "True enough," Robert agreed. They continued talking about something, but Sam had lost interest. She called the lawyer whose number Irene had given her. "Hello, Stephen. I'm calling about protection. I need a defender. My husband wants to kill me. And he's involved in multi-million-dollar schemes using shady methods. Can we meet today?" Stephen was an old friend of Irene's. They had been friends since school. After Irene's husband passed away, Stephen had taken on the role of helping her with various things, whether it was fixing a shelf or helping with wallpapering. He had been working as a lawyer for over 30 years and had built a solid reputation. He looked like a representative of a bygone era of the intelligentsia, always clean-shaven, well-groomed, wearing a hat, and carrying his signature cane, which he liked to joke was useful for punishing crooks and thieves. Irene had given Sam his number when they left the bank. "He's a good, trustworthy man. He might even help you get your apartment back. And if you have any tax issues," Irene added, "he can help with those too." Sam transferred the file with Robert's confession onto a flash drive and headed to her meeting with Stephen. He received her in his apartment, which was modestly yet tastefully furnished. He listened to Sam, reviewed the documents, listened to the recording, and then concluded. "You did well, Sam. You untangled this case on your own, but..." "But what?" Sam asked, fear creeping into her voice. "The recording won't be accepted in court. It was obtained illegally." Sam felt the ground slip from under her, even though she was sitting in a chair the entire time. She looked at the lawyer's kind and wise eyes with hope. He smiled and said, "Unfortunately, Sam, proving your innocence isn't going to work. Unless your husband confesses in front of witnesses. But we can nail him for all the other crimes. What do you say?" She returned home feeling completely drained. The thought of carrying the stigma of a thief for the rest of her life was unbearable. Sam didn't want to, couldn't accept such a fate. But there was no other choice. Stephen began legal proceedings against Robert for large-scale fraud, and it seemed to be successful because that evening, Robert showed up outside Sam's window again, shouting. "Sam, come out. Sam, I know you're in there. We need to talk." He kept yelling until some guys arrived and took him away, handcuffing him. Sam learned from Melanie that it was the police. Robert was arrested for fraud today. "Oh, what a life I have, girls," Melanie exclaimed. Sam suddenly realized that if Melanie's or Aaron's offices were searched, they would find the bugs. Morris reassured her, promising to take care of it, and left. He returned 2 hours later. Sam was asleep. The laptop and phone were emitting a pleasant hum. Morris had thrown the bugs into the river. Sam slept until morning. She woke up to the smell of coffee and fresh pastries. Morris was busy in the kitchen. She was surprised. "You can bake?" she asked. "I bought them at the store," he smiled, "just warming them up in the oven." "And where did you get the money?" "I did work for 2 whole days, remember?" Morris reminded her. Stephen called around 10 in the morning with an update. He said the prosecution was cracking down hard on Robert, arresting all his accomplices, and conducting searches at the warehouses. Thousands of customers had started complaining about the product quality. Previously, these complaints were hidden, but now local newspapers and social media were exploding with angry comments. Melanie wasn't spared either. People were saying her dresses were awful compared to those made and sold by Sam. Sam thanked the lawyer for his help. She was incredibly relieved that she didn't have to take part in the mess. When the prosecutor asked Stephen where he had gotten such valuable evidence, he simply shrugged. "It was dropped in my mailbox. Anonymously." Sam convinced Morris to take a break and visit Irene. On the way, they stopped by his house. Manny had grown so used to the elderly neighbor that he didn't react when his owner appeared in the yard. He just stayed beside her as she worked in the garden. After making sure the dog was fine, Sam and Morris headed to Irene's. She greeted them warmly. "Oh, Sam, is this your suitor? Such a handsome young man." Morris blushed at being called a suitor. He was seated at the table and offered tea with raspberry jam. Sam handed Irene a cake that Morris had carefully chosen at the store. Irene praised the cake and then began to praise Morris. "Tall, lean, with such eyes. Quite a looker. You'd never guess he was homeless," Morris joked. Irene laughed, then added seriously. "Just make sure you don't hurt my Sam. Do you know what she's been through? Not everyone could handle it." "I won't, I swear," Morris replied with equal seriousness. After leaving Irene's, they decided to take a walk in the park. They skipped stones on the water and watched the ripples spread. Morris asked, "Do you regret how it all ended?" "What do you mean?" Sam asked, puzzled. "That you couldn't prove your innocence." Sam sighed. "Of course, I regret it. But life is so short," she smiled, "I don't want to waste it on regrets. You know, I was lying in bed last night thinking about what I really want. I realized that I want to live by the sea. I haven't been there in so long. I love the sea, but I love the mountains even more." "How about you?" Morris said. "Oh," Sam grimaced, "the mountains aren't for me. I'm all about a lazy vacation, you know. My mom used to drag me on hikes when I was a kid. I never liked them." They fell silent, listening to the children playing nearby. Sam then added, "I want kids, too." Morris nodded. "Me too. I want a family, a nice home. Not like the one I live in now," he clarified. "Didn't you ever want to prove your innocence, Morris?" He thought for a moment. "I did, many times. But it's impossible. Is it?" "Yes. You just have to accept it." Sam tossed another stone into the water. "Tony's situation is bad," Morris said, "I looked into it. The factory will soon be auctioned off. And you're not sad about it?" "It's not my factory. It's not for me to be sad about," he smiled. And don't be sad for too long, Sam, okay? She nodded. Then he walked her home and went back to his own place. Returning home, Sam felt the absence of Morris for the first time. The apartment was too quiet and empty. Irene called and told her to turn on the local news immediately. The report was about Robert and his accomplices, who were facing 12 years in prison for large-scale fraud. Sam didn't feel joy or satisfaction, only deep exhaustion. So, curling up on the couch, she fell asleep. She woke up to a call from Morris. "Well, Sam, congratulate me. I found a job," he boasted. "Did you sign the contract?" Sam yawned. "Of course. Were you asleep? Did I wake you?" "No," Sam lied. "I missed you. Got a minute?" They chatted about trivial things. Then she took a shower and made scrambled eggs. The fridge was empty. Sam decided it was time to go grocery shopping. As she left her building, she ran into Melanie, who forced a smile upon seeing her. "Hi. What are you doing here?" Sam asked coldly. "Sam, you probably know that Robert is on trial," Melanie said. "I know. Yesterday, all my girls quit," Melanie sniffled. "I'm closing the boutique." Sam shrugged. "Good. I was thinking," Melanie continued, "maybe you could buy it." "Me?" Sam laughed. "I don't have any money, you took it all. And even if I did, no. I don't want to cling to the past." She walked to the store with her head held high. Sam kept looking for a job, doubting she'd find one. She only saw Morris on Saturdays, his day off. He had found work at a construction company as an assistant marketer. The pay was low, but it was enough to live on. Every week, he gave Sam part of what he owed her, and he got very angry when she refused to take the money. A month later, he moved from his little house to a rented room. He left Manny with the neighbor, whose grandchildren had promised to take care of the dog. One Sunday morning, Stephen called Sam. "Good morning, Sam. Are you awake?" "No," she lied, "but I'm glad to hear from you." "Sam, are you aware of the latest news?" Sam felt a bad premonition. She sat up in bed. "No. What happened?" "Your ex-husband has confessed. He admitted to bribing the lawyer and framing you." Sam's eyes widened. The lawyer explained that Robert, sitting in his cell, realized how bad things were. He would be imprisoned, his accomplices too. It meant his life was hanging by a thread. He requested a Bible, began reading it often, praying, and confessed his sins, likely out of fear of death. Sam gasped. "Will my record be cleared?" "It will be annulled," the lawyer confirmed. "And Robert will get an additional 3 years, I think." After the conversation ended, Sam pinched herself. Everything felt like a dream. She turned on the TV, and the first thing she heard was the news that the charges against her had been dropped. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she didn't try to stop them. She called Morris in the evening and told him everything. He congratulated her and was genuinely happy for her. Sam thought it would be nice if Tony could also repent. It seemed like God had heard her thoughts. At least, Sam couldn't find another explanation for what happened next. According to Morris, a week after Sam was officially cleared of all charges, he received a call from an unknown number. Morris answered. "Morris, hello," he heard Tony's voice. "It's me. Do you recognize me?" "Of course, I do." Tony suggested meeting up with Morris. After work, he picked Morris up, awkwardly shook his old friend's hand, and took him to a bar. They ordered beers and sat by the window. Tony kept rubbing his bald head and sweating profusely. He talked about random things, but it was clear he had something else on his mind besides cars. Morris couldn't take it anymore and asked directly. "So, why did you ask me to meet?" "I want to ask for your forgiveness," Tony replied. Morris frowned. For what? For everything. For Lily. For setting you up. I'm sorry. Morris laughed. Why the sudden remorse? Had a revelation. Tony downed his drink in one gulp and then said, I have cancer. Morris looked at his bald head again and asked. Cancer? What stage? Stage 4. I'm dying, Tony said with an embarrassed smile. In that smile, Morris saw a glimpse of the scared boy who was always bullied in school, and it took his breath away. He stood up, walked around the table, and hugged Tony's shoulders. Tony started crying, and Morris had to fight back his own tears as Tony kept repeating. Forgive me, my friend, forgive me. Tony didn't live long, just about 2 months. During that time, Morris introduced him to Sam. They went fishing together a few times and visited Irene, who welcomed Tony with special tenderness, knowing his condition. Only 3 people attended Tony's funeral: Morris, Sam, and Lily, who had been informed of his death by her mother. Seeing Morris at the cemetery, Lily gave him an awkward smile and approached him. Hi. Hi, he replied. Is that your wife? She nodded toward Sam, who was standing a bit farther away. No, Morris smiled, but I like her. Are you married? Married, Lily showed him her ring. He's a doctor. We have a son. I'm expecting our second. I'm thinking about naming him Tony. Morris teared up and discreetly wiped away a tear. Yes, that's a good name. After the funeral, Morris and Lily didn't see each other again. But it felt like a heavy burden had been lifted off Morris's shoulders, the grudge he'd held against Lily for so many years. Watching Morris and Lily, Sam wanted to feel jealous. She liked this kind-hearted man who had come into her life by chance. But the very next day, Morris invited her on an impromptu date to the park and confessed his feelings to her. He took her boating and stopped in the middle of the lake. They rocked gently on the waves in the dark. Suddenly, musicians in 2 other boats rowed over to them. At first, Sam didn't realize they were playing for her. But when she did, she screamed in delight. Morris laughed and pulled a ring out of his pocket. Sam, we met under interesting circumstances, and I'm certainly not the best catch. But I love you so much, you mean the world to me. I know it sounds strange, but will you be my wife? Yes, Sam smiled, of course, yes. They decided on a modest wedding. They invited Stephen, Irene, Katie, and Tina. Morris invited his co-workers. They all went to a restaurant where they told funny stories until morning, reminisced, cried, and danced until their feet ached. Sam moved in with Morris. The room they lived in reminded her of the one she grew up in. Sometimes she felt overwhelmed by sad. She had gone back to the beginning, but then she would stop herself. In her childhood, she didn't have Morris. Together, they could accomplish a lot, even if they had to start from scratch. Morris wondered how Sam managed to afford groceries and gifts for him if she still hadn't found a job she liked. Sam confessed that her mother had left her some savings. What are you going to do with it? I want to start my own business, Sam replied, lying next to him on the bed. Really? That's great. Women's clothing again? Sam made a face. No, that's in the past. I'm thinking maybe children's or men's clothing. Just look at how men dress in our town. It's a disaster. I agree, Morris laughed, and I'm the prime example, right? No, Sam kissed him, you're the best man